Is it time?
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day.
We'll know in a very short period of time, but it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good.
I see issue with that. And again, hey.
You're not going to be able to insult your way to the presidency. That's not going to happen.
I don't know who created Pokemon Go, but I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokemon go to the polls.
I'm Ted Cruz, and my pronoun is kiss my ass.
So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires, what we need to do to create these jobs.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to put
Not good. Believe me, not good.
Hello, dissidents. And hello, Tusker.
Hello. How are you, Russ?
Good. How are you tonight?
I'm doing really well. Got a beautiful sunny morning, day, all day today, and beautiful evening here in Arkansas. A little hot, but other than that, it's good.
You know what I bet you did not do today? I bet you didn't have a C-section.
No, I did not have a C-section.
Well, you know who did? Keaton's wife.
Wow.
Boom. There you go. We have, don't take it personally. He's co-hosting next week. Kid has potential. He's got podcaster written all over him. So there he is, August Weiss, the newest member of the dissident family. And growing up under these circumstances, God knows what kind of serial killer this kid is going to be. So
yeah, no, surely not.
Surely not. All right, but we do have a guest, Mr. Caleb Maupin, who's just been chilling out these days, taking it easy, taking it light. Caleb, how are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Good. I know you've been making the rounds. You've been everywhere this week. And this is because your book seems to have been banned by Amazon for all effects and purposes. So what happened?
Well, I wrote this book. I wrote it in 2020. It was published on August 31st in 2020, and it's about Kamala Harris. It was right after she had become the vice presidential candidate. I decided to write this book about a lot of research I had been doing on her, etc. So it's been for sale, and I sold between 2020 and on Monday, I sold about 595 copies of it. So not a huge seller. It made a little bit of a splash. It got a review in the Morning Star, which is the communist daily newspaper of the United Kingdom. It got a review in a couple newspapers in India, which totally surprised me. But I guess they watch RT in India. It's English language, so that they knew me from there, and Kamala's mother is from India, so that's where that happened. But other than that, it didn't really create a huge splash. I spoke to some web conferences about it, whatever. Not a big deal. 4 years have gone by. And then Kamala got the nomination. She ended up, Joe Biden stepped down on Sunday. Monday, the media was treating Kamala Harris as the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party. So I figured, okay, there'll be a bit of a boost in sales. And it did sell a little bit on Monday. And then at 7:26 p.m. Eastern time, I received an email. And it said that there was a problem with one of my books and that I would need to change the cover art. And I thought, well, that's weird. There hasn't been a cover. I checked, and it was the Kamala Harris book. And I checked because there hadn't been an issue with the cover in the last 4 years. And it was, individually designed. The name of the designer is on the original edition. His name's Arthur Porter. He lives in Arizona. He's a friend of mine. And it's original artwork, but okay, there's an issue with the cover. All right. And I figured I want to get this out there because Kamala Harris is the talk of the town. So I just put a blank generic cover following one of their templates on it and resubmitted, rejected. And so I woke up in the morning, Tuesday morning, resubmitted, rejected. Every time I would send it in, about an hour later, it would be right back to me. And I thought, this is very, very strange. What in the world is going on here? So, I raised the alarm, and a lot of people smelled foul play. Max Blumenthal, others have spoken out. A lot of people from all across the political spectrum. This seems like pretty blatant censorship. So we put it on Lulu, and Lulu carried it until Thursday. And it's still on Lulu, but if you go to try and buy it, it won't let you process your credit card. If you buy it via PayPal or with your credit card, it says that the transaction just won't process. So right now I'm selling the PDF version of it on Gumroad, which is a website where you can sell electronic files. And I will say we've sold over 1,000 in the last week. This has created
Jake, you want to throw up that link?
Yeah, this has created a huge amount of interest in the book. This isn't something I wrote for this election. I wrote it 4 years ago, and it's been out there all this time. The information in it is not unique. I quote Reason Magazine and their studies of Kamala Harris. I quote, Donald Harris, her father, his essays. I quote Kamala Harris's autobiography. It's not like I have some deep inside scoop of information. It's pretty weird that this got, just scooped up by Amazon all of a sudden. And then, Lulu did the same thing pretty quickly afterwards. So if you want it now, it's on Gumroad, and a lot of people are reading it and loving it.
Isn't Lulu kind of an alternative press for authors like yourself? Amazon's not a shock, but that seems very strange that they would have pulled it.
It does, and it's still listed. You cannot process your credit card transaction if you go to buy it, which is very, very strange. As of now, Lulu, the only reason that they've given me is they've said, well, so many people tried to buy it. Maybe there's an issue with the system or something. And I don't buy that. I have a hard time believing that one. Generally booksellers want to make money.
Right, yeah.
A lot of people buying their products is something they tend to be happy about and want to enable to happen. And the fact that it hasn't been fixed, and I continue to get people tweeting at me, tried to buy it on Lulu, was unable to buy it on Lulu. The other thing that was weird is when they took it down from Amazon.
Especially an alternative press like that. Like, how many hits do they get where they could potentially sell tens of thousands of books?
Right. The other thing that's weird is when they took it down from Amazon, occasionally if you sell on Amazon, there'll be a bit of a snafu with a book or something. What they generally do is the page remains up. It just says, this is currently unavailable. Title currently unavailable. Not this one. All the links leading to the Amazon page are completely blank. It just says it's been completely scrubbed from Amazon. Now, you can still read the reviews on Goodreads that it got, and it got overwhelmingly positive reviews on Goodreads.com. Those reviews are still up there, and you can read what people had to say about it. They all loved it. So it looks very, very, very much like censorship because it happened the day after, or I guess the day that she became the presumptive nominee, the day after Biden dropped out. So at this point, I'm appreciating the fact that so many people are reading it, and it seems like this has backfired. But I still have questions about, how this happened. Why? Max Blumenthal suggested that this could have come from an order from the White House because this matches kind of the way a lot of COVID related books were removed. So this is certainly something to be concerned about. Now, a number of people have said to me, this could be an FEC violation. Because if books critical of one candidate are being removed while there's a million I Hate Donald Trump books on Amazon. And you'll notice there are not very many books critical of Kamala Harris on Amazon or that have been published in general. There's one book, it's called Amateur Hour. It was printed by the Washington Times Press last year, I believe, or maybe it was earlier this year. I did read it and I learned a lot from it. But there's not much that's critical of her. There's not much about her at all. And that's what's so weird, right? With Barack Obama, we knew everything there was to know about him. His mom, his dad, his pastor, his school in Indonesia, his stepfather, everything. But with Kamala Harris, we just know that she's been in Congress. She's the vice president. And now they expect us to all just go to the polls and make her president. And the media has been in overdrive doing, really fake and lacking in substance stories about how much everyone loves her, informing us that we love her. So we should love her because we already love her.
Right. Well, it's also very strange. We were talking about this before we came on. I've read all of it except the last 10 pages, which I know that's where the big reveal is. But I'll get to that later. But having read it, mostly. I don't get it. I don't get it. There's plenty of information. There are plenty of articles about the things you cover there. And you're much more concerned in this book with her historical context than with the specifics of her career and biography. You get into that, but it seems like you were much more concerned with placing her within the broader sweep of post-war American politics and its trends. Why pull something like that? Like there's no bombshell there. There's no, she used to deal heroin in the Tenderloin. There's nothing like that in there. Why would they target this book?
Yeah, well, I did not write this. This book is not a partisan hit piece on Kamala Harris. I'm above that, and that wouldn't have been fun for me to write. It would have been boring. I used her as an example to make three major political points. The first essay, it's an essay in three parts. The first one is about how she is a product of the Berkeley New Left. Her parents attended UC Berkeley. They met at protests. Her father is a Marxist economist, and they were most likely in some kind of communist organization when they met. I'm sure there's an FBI file somewhere that says which communist group they were in, whether it was the Progressive Labor Party or the Socialist Workers Party or one of those groups. We don't know which one in particular, but they met.
Well, you also, while you're on that was my next question, actually, just not to break your flow, but you talk a lot about the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the influence that it had on the left that she would have grown up in. So can you talk a little about that in the overall context of her upbringing?
Right. Well, McCarthyism, we all know about that. The Communist Party was outlawed and crushed. The Rosenbergs got executed. Pretty awful time. But McCarthyism kind of turned into a vehicle through which a lot of middle class elements were kind of rising up against the American establishment. Joe McCarthy was going after Voice of America, the propaganda outlet, and Radio Free Europe. And Joe McCarthy was accusing the army of being communist. And a lot of middle class kind of people were using the anti-communism to kind of rally against the more liberal elites in the establishment, like the Rockefellers, who had funded, Planned Parenthood and, the work of Alfred Kinsey and others. And so there's this kind of, McCarthyism became this kind of middle-class right-wing populist movement. And so that's when, Joe McCarthy, suddenly the media turned on him, he drank himself to death, etc. And then starting from like the late 50s, there was a program, it really escalated. It started earlier, but it really escalated in the late 50s, where the American government was covertly subsidizing and arranging for the Ford Foundation, for the Rockefeller think tanks, and others to subsidize left-wing activism in the United States. I think McGeorge Bundy, who served in the Kennedy administration, and others, there was covert funding for leftist politics. And the main program that carried it out was something called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And it looked like a nonprofit or whatever, but it was actually set up by the CIA, and it was to promote free thought and independence. And it was funding a lot of people who called themselves communists and socialists, but they were against the Soviet Union. They were against Soviet communism. They were against the old communist parties. And while at the same time they were criticizing the Pentagon and criticizing American consumerism, they were also doing kind of cancel culture against the intellectuals who were loyal to the Soviet Union, were loyal to communism. And they were engaging in this kind of like, you can be on neither side. You can be against the communists and you can be against the American government. And it was actually being paid for by the American government. And the Congress for Cultural Freedom program is where left-wing politics in America started really being reinvented in the lead up to what became the hippie movement of the 60s. Susan Sontag, her essays first appeared in CIA-funded publications like Partisan Review. In addition to that, you had, I talk about Hannah Arendt. She writes this book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, which I read when I was in college, and it's pushed.
Why do you want to make Chris Hedges cry?
What's that?
Why do you want to make Chris Hedges cry?
Oh, well, there you go. But Eichmann in Jerusalem, you read that essay, and it looks like kind of a critique of conformity. But what it's really kind of saying is that deep down, average people are all potential Nazis and need to be controlled, and that Nazism and fascism is just populism, right? And that, and then that matches what Susan Sontag later said. She basically proclaimed communism to be nothing but the most effective form of fascism. And it's this kind of this anti-populism, this narrative of leftism that is not against capitalism. It's not against our economic system. It's against conformity. It's against the military. It's about protecting intellectuals from the vulgar mob that would organize to try and bother them. And the head of the Congress for Cultural Freedom program was Irving Kristol, who later became the father of neoconservatism. So not only did he help reinvent leftist politics, he later, helped reinvent right-wing politics in the 1970s as the kind of the godfather of neoconservatism. His son is Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard. So politics was being reinvented, and the Bay Area in particular, where Kamala Harris grew up, was kind of ground zero for that. There was also a parallel CIA program going on during these years, which is now public record. It's called Project MK Ultra. And that was where the CIA was trying to develop mind control, and they were going around and getting people on LSD and hallucinogens. There was Operation Midnight Climax in the Bay Area, where they were going around and dropping acid in people's drinks. They were going to brothels and tying people to beds and putting them on acid to see what would happen. They were doing all kinds of things to do that. And Kamala Harris grew up in leftist politics in San Francisco in the 60s. Which was, yes, a very left-wing environment, but it was left-wing politics that was being remolded by the CIA. And that kind of explains where we're at politically right now, especially in relation to the whole woke thing and what's going on with that. So that's the first essay. Second essay is called Psychology Behind Politics. And that is about Kamala Harris and her personality. And I talk about how the personality of various presidents and leaders lines up and how Kamala Harris is estranged from her father. And there's a parallel life story and a lot of figures you find in a particular wing of American politics associated with the Hillary Clinton State Department, and how that's not generally the kind of psychology that communism and Marxism have tried to appeal to. And the third essay is called The Geopolitical Stage. And that's where I talk about Tulsi Gabbard going after Kamala Harris and Tulsi Gabbard and who she's tied to and how there are divisions there was division within the Obama administration between Hillary Clinton's allies and those that were opposed to what she was doing. And that's why, John Kerry, when John Kerry became Secretary of State in Obama's second term, you'll notice U.S. foreign policy dramatically shifted during that time. The Hillary Clinton years, the first term of Obama was about spreading chaos and revolution. The second term of Obama, with John Kerry running the State Department, was all about signing deals with countries, establishing relations with Cuba, the Iran nuclear deal, the FARC negotiations in Colombia, etc. And that there are a number of people in the Pentagon who are very afraid of what the results of another Arab Spring would be. And that Kamala Harris has been primed and selected by the people who ran the State Department under Hillary Clinton. And their goal is they want global revolution and chaos to spread what they call the open international system. They want, permanent revolution, I guess you could call it, but, not in the Trotskyite sense, but in the, free market global capitalism sense. And their enemy and their target is what they call populism. And they see Donald Trump as an expression of populism, but also Xi Jinping in China, also Putin in Russia, also, the Iranian government, et cetera. And they see populism as the enemy, and they see globalism and internationalism and mass uprisings fomented by social media as the way to bring it. And I talk about that. And Tulsi Gabbard represents those who are very concerned about that. So those are the three parts of it. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to read a little from that, and then Tusker, your question will perfectly come out of that intro. So this I found really fascinating, and we'll come back to this because the book does. The biggest banks, the 4 super major oil companies, and the Silicon Valley tech giants all incarnate a powerful, globally oriented liberal faction that opposes him meaning Trump. They seek to make the USA more racially inclusive and to destabilize anti-imperialist countries in the name of spreading human rights. They favor a more social democratic model, perhaps involving universal basic income to stabilize U.S. society, as the population is transitioned to lower living standards across the board. They favor reduction of consumption in the name of fighting global warming and further integrating the U.S. economy into a global market. While Trump's faction focuses on increasing its short-term profits, the globalist faction that Trump decries focuses on maintaining stability while gradually implementing long-term goals. pouring billions of dollars into research and social engineering, the upper faction of U.S. capital favors gradually and carefully reducing living standards, eliminating anti-imperialist governments around the world, transitioning to a more open global economy, normalizing police-state repression in everyday life, and reducing the human population. All right, so Tusker, your question?
Yeah, sure. So in that third chapter, you mention that in reality, what we're actually experiencing in politics is really more of a fight at the top. And it's between different factions, and that some of those factions are trying to hold off one faction that they see as particularly dangerous. And so I'm kind of wondering, what's the nature of that faction that they want to kind of keep out of power? What's its class interests? And how is it so dangerous for ordinary working people?
Well, there's a lot written about this. I certainly didn't develop this understanding. There's a very good book called The Rich and the Ultra Rich by Ferdinand Lundberg that I think was written in the 1930s. And it talked about, who was supporting Roosevelt and who was opposing him. And then Carroll Quigley, who was the mentor of Bill Clinton, he wrote a very good book called The Anglo-American Establishment. And he wrote a much longer book called Tragedy and Hope, kind of making this understanding. And then later you have, a very good book that I often reference called The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. And in the early 60s and in the 70s, a number of people in the United States became aware of the fact that among the American rich, there were two factions. Carl Oglesby calls them the Yankees and the Cowboys, but Carroll Quigley spoke of the Anglo-American establishment. I think some of the LaRouche people, they talk about the British Empire, et cetera, or the Rockefeller Republicans or whatever. But there is a faction among the rich and powerful in the United States that is more concerned with social engineering and staying at the top in the long run than they are with short-term profits. And people trace it back to the Round Table Group established by the will of Cecil Rhodes, who was, it's Rhodesia. And Zimbabwe used to be Rhodesia, is the British colonialist. And that there is a faction of the ultra-rich that have very much been interested in how do we stay at the top permanently? And how do we impose a lot of control to make sure we don't have upheavals and revolutions and uprisings? And if that means that we have to spend a lot of money in the short term in order to do it, that's fine. But it's better to have stability so that we stay at the top indefinitely than it is to just have our profits shoot up in the short term. And, you can go back to, the Roosevelt administration. It was pretty clear that Roosevelt, he was aligned with the Rockefeller family. He was aligned with some wealthy people, but the National Association of Manufacturers very much opposed him because he supported unions in the factories and he passed, Social Security and unemployment insurance, and that they saw him as cutting into their profits, whereas there were some more strategic oriented of the elite who had a different orientation. And this is a push and pull. And after the Second World War, the military-industrial complex really exploded. The U.S. government was spending so much on bombs and tanks and weapons that gave a boost to these lower-level capitalists who were in on that. And they were very anti-communist already because they didn't like labor unions, et cetera. But now they were making lots of money with tanks and bombs and weapons. So what we call the right wing now, the John Birch Society, Barry Goldwater, et cetera, what we call the right wing goes back. It's those lower level capitalists that weren't, on board with this overall social engineering agenda that the ultra rich might have. And I think, you can interpret the political crisis of the 60s and 70s as this disagreement. But, by the 80s, the Soviet Union was getting ready to fall. U.S. society was restabilizing. And Ronald Reagan famously said, we're all friends after 6 o'clock, meaning the fight was over. Right? In the 80s and 90s, things were pretty normal. But after the financial crisis of 2008, the fight reopened. And that, many people have commented that Obama is a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski. He studied at Columbia University. And the people that really haven't had the upper hand in American politics since the Carter administration got power back under Barack Obama. And Donald Trump was opposing them, and those folks have picked Kamala Harris. And that, again, these are, all, when you talk about class interests, these are all capitalists. These are all people that sit at the top of a global imperialist system, but they have different goals, and they're invested in different countries. I mean, a lot of it just gets back to the fact Russia is an oil exporting country, and the Rockefellers and the DuPonts, they're all tied into oil. Whereas a lot of these lower level capitalists, they're manufacturers. And what country is a big manufacturing? It's the factory of the world, China. So, industrial manufacturers don't like China. Oil bankers don't like Russia. They both don't like them both, but there's a difference in agendas.
Well, you know, one thing that I think changed since you wrote it in 2020 is you identify Silicon Valley as kind of being a block with that Rockefeller globalist group. And now there's kind of been this split where you have the Elon tech people, the Peter Thiel people, the JD Vances going over to the lower capital, even though they're quite wealthy. Elon, the wealthiest person in the world. So that Silicon Valley faction seems to have split since you wrote this.
Well, the Silicon Valley was created by American intelligence, and there is no question about that. That's widely acknowledged. I think, you know, Al Gore, he got attacked when he was running for president because he said, I invented the internet, or was misquoted as saying that. And what he was referring to was the fact that it was a decision by the American government that this was something they could do. They could, invest a lot of money in computers and make the United States the center of the computer revolution. And the Soviet Union, even though they had amazing breakthroughs in computers, they were the first people in outer space, they developed their own home computer system, they just didn't have the resources to invest in it the same way the United States did. And so, you know, you can read about how the NSA and the CIA and other intelligence agencies were very key in creating Microsoft and Google and Amazon and IBM and all the corporations that we now identify as Silicon Valley. And that late 70s, early 80s explosion in computer technology that put the United States at the center of that. It actually matches what was advocated by Zbigniew Brzezinski. He, as far back as 1970, he wrote a book about the technotronic era and how control of information was how the world could be, quote, Americanized. And so this is what those folks have always wanted. Now, what I find to be very interesting, you know, I talked about how Al Gore, you know, he said, you know, we invented the internet, I invented the internet. What's interesting is that Al Gore also had a spiritual advisor who was like his psychic, and her name was Marilyn Ferguson, and he paid her lots of money, and she came over and did readings, etc., for the Gore family. And Marilyn Ferguson, you can read all about her. Her big book is called The Aquarian Conspiracy, and it was a best-selling book in the 1980s, all about how there was a big revolution coming, and it wasn't pro-communist or anti-communist. It was just about human awakening and human enlightenment, and the world was going to get back into balance with Mother Nature, and we were going to get overpopulation under control. And yeah, you look at that, that's some scary stuff, and that she's linked to, and she praises endlessly in that book, the Stanford Research Institute, which we know it was ground zero of a lot of this CIA programs involving MK Ultra and like weird research they did into psychics and mind control and all of that. And that was where Marilyn Ferguson came out of. So it's not surprising that she would be the one trusted enough to be the psychic advisor of Al Gore. But Al Gore is also talking about how, you know, they invented the internet, and they very much tried to have the U.S. government facilitate the rise of these corporations. And I think that's important to discuss as well. And that's where Silicon Valley came from. But let's be real, Silicon Valley has a lot of self-made men in it. It has a lot of libertarians in it, right?
Right.
You know, and so the personality of your average Silicon Valley tech bro is not the same as the overall agenda of the people who own the big tech monopolies. I think that's the distinction that needs to be made.
So now you suggest that Biden did not want, well, you say straight out, he did not want Kamala Harris. And you share some interesting facts, like that she was not originally listed as the VP. Can you talk about that a little?
Oh, that's very clear if you look at the chain of events. So Biden named a date that he was going to announce his running mate. And he said it was going to be a woman of color. And immediately, all the mainstream talk shows and all of that say, it's got to be Kamala. It's got to be Kamala. But they're not naming Kamala. They're not naming Kamala. And that date comes and it goes. And there's still no nominee. And it's 10 days past that date. And he still has not named his VP nominee. Karen Bass is named, you know, as possibly being the person. And then all of a sudden, the New York Times reveals that she went to Cuba when she was a young person. She was on the Vince Ramos brigades, you know, and that becomes leaked. Oh, she can't be trusted. She's a Cuba sympathizer or whatever. You know, it's funny that just came out then, and who might have this information or whatever. But regardless, that gets revealed, right? And Susan Rice, there's some talk of Susan Rice. And then the schedule for the Democrat National Convention comes out, and it's got VP candidate one place on the schedule, and it's got Kamala Harris another place on the schedule. And then Kamala Harris unfollows Joe Biden on Twitter. And everyone notices this, and they're like, what's going on here? 6 hours later, she's named as the nominee. And I am very convinced. It is hard for me to believe that all that chain of events does not indicate that Biden was doing everything he could to not select her. And one fact that must be pointed out, and I've met Tara Reid a number of times, I consider her a friend, is that that Kamala Harris has said during the campaign that she believed all the allegations of sexual assault, sexual misconduct against Joe Biden. And to this day, she has never recanted that. And that's quite interesting as well. She says that she believed the allegations against Joe Biden. The other thing that's weird is you'll remember that convention happened during
just real fast, Caleb. I'm trying to remember if I'm correct on this. I thought whenever Tara Reid, she went to some women's organization, I thought Kamala Harris was tied into that organization.
Yes, there has been, from what Tara Reid has said publicly on podcasts and such, there has been communication between Tara Reid and the Kamala Harris campaign. So that's very weird. The other thing that was said that then happened was that, you remember this convention happened during the lockdown, right? There was not a big crowd there and all of that. But Kamala Harris is giving her speech and she's talking about how she was a prosecutor and all of that. And then she says, the line that she says in her speech is, she says, "I know a predator when I see one." And then there's this awkward pause in her speech. Like, if you read her speech, she would be talking about Trump, except it was awkward. It was like, that was like a subtle threat. Like, possibly, she knew what, she wasn't just talking necessarily about Donald Trump. I mean, it's not clear. Again, we're engaging in an element of what you might call shadow boxing or something like that. We don't really know what went on. But the fact that Biden was 10 days late picking his VP, the fact that Kamala Harris unfollowed him and wasn't originally on the schedule, and the fact that since Kamala Harris has taken office, her staff are considered to be completely toxic and she can't keep them. People don't want to work for her. The Biden administration cannot stand, the Harris staff and the people who work in her office, right? And they have a reputation. I mean, all the stuff that's come out of her office over the last 4 years, none of this is at all surprising.
All right. So that's a perfect segue. You spend a lot of time talking about her as somebody who is just really filled with hatred and a desire for vengeance, really almost as the apotheosis of everything that the CIA and the Cultural Congress have been trying to turn the left into. Just a manifestation of grievance and identity politics for their own sake, and victimhood as a form of moral righteousness. So something you keep coming back to, and I'm sure our audience will have seen this, but whoever gets tired of Kamala Harris laughing about locking up the parents of truants. So we'll take a look at that and then discuss this theory.
Education is tantamount to a crime. Standing here, were it not for the education I received. And I know many of us will say the same thing. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it. And this is what we did. We recognized that in that initiative, as a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective and goal, which is to get those kids in school. So, to that end, on my letterhead, now let me tell you something about my letterhead. When you're the DA of a major city in this country, usually the job comes with a badge. And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. So I sent a letter out on my letterhead to every parent in the school district, outlining the connection that was statistically proven between elementary school truancy, high school dropouts, who will become a victim of crime, and who will become a perpetrator of crime. We sent it out to everyone. A friend of mine actually called me and he said, Kamala, my wife got the letter. She freaked out. She brought all the kids into the living room, held up the letter, said, if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail.
That's cracking her up. That is, if the politics thing doesn't work out, she might have a future at the Improv.
Well, the thing about that clip in particular, right? Pay attention to the facial expressions, the body language, some of the language that she uses about her big stick. She's got this big stick that she's going to use and all of that. This is not a healthy person. There's some very, very dangerous sadism there, I guess you could say. The other thing that I think is important about that clip, and I point this out, is she starts out by talking about herself. And if you watch that clip, look how her face goes down when she talks about, I wouldn't be anywhere, and it's tantamount to a crime. She's got this self-pity that just comes over her. Kamala talks about her childhood more than any other politician in modern times that I've ever seen. They have T-shirts. That little girl was me, 10-year-old Kamala Harris on them. The latest thing, we're supposed to, we can't make fun of her laugh because she was bullied for that when she was a kid, so that therefore we can't make fun of her laugh. We're all just bad people if we make fun of that, hysterical cackle that she does, just the endless amount of the world was unfair to little Kamala Harris. Awful things happened to her, which I'm sure did, right? I mean, I'm not trying to belittle anything that happened to her. But that seems to be a motivating factor. Kamala Harris, I'm not going to say her age, but she is well over 50 years old. And for her to be talking about her childhood and invoking her childhood endlessly as she does, that is very, very unhealthy. And that seems to be what gives her license to do a lot of the awful things that she has done. First of all, let me talk about, and they're trying to scrub all the bad things that she's done from Google searches and stuff. That particular clip, there's a number of places on Wikipedia and other places where I found it edited to say, oh, well, there were no parents that were ever jailed for truancy. And then if you look at the source doesn't say that. Right. Yeah. And they have tried their hardest to just scrub any record of this reality. But we can go over the facts. Right. 2004, Kevin Cooper was hours away from getting the death penalty by lethal injection. And she tries to block evidence, DNA evidence from being acquired. And the DNA evidence is acquired. The execution is stopped. In addition to that, 2010, you have the drug lab scandal, which is, you want to talk about something unforgivable. I mean, it's just awful. This drug lab is turning over false positive results. People are, testing positive for drugs when they didn't use them. And over 1,000 cases in California are dismissed. People are let out of jail because of this drug lab scandal. I mean, can you imagine this? People are, on trial, possibly going to jail. They take a drug test and the drug test says positive and they didn't use drugs and they end up in jail or pleading guilty because of that. I mean, she violated the rights of at least 1,000 people, according to the California courts. They called her out. Reason Magazine, I must say, has done great research onto what she was as California State Attorney General. 2014, after she was reelected California State Attorney General, her office starts arguing against releasing prisoners on the grounds that they need their cheap labor. They need their cheap labor because their cheap labor is just a valuable source. Prisoners, you can pay them 8 cents to 37 cents an hour. Whereas, law-abiding citizens, you got to pay them benefits and decent wages. They get union protection. I mean, what is this? We don't want this, right? Let's just, use prisoners to put out fires, use prisoners to pick up garbage on the highway. That's particularly odious. Also, 2013, she's speaking at the Chicago Ideas Forum. She starts strutting around the stage, making fun of those who protest mass incarceration. Build more schools, less jails. Build more schools, less jails. It's just so, those protesters, those people that oppose millions of people being locked up. Oh, they're so annoying. Oh, they're just so obnoxious. And they're not dealing with the fact that she's got to have padlocks on her door. And I mean, this is a very, very vengeful person who's very indifferent to what her actions do and the impact that they have on other people. Right. She really has no qualms about harming other people. And again, in that clip where she's like, I wouldn't be anywhere without my education. It's not about helping those kids. Now, let's think about a situation, right? Obviously, if a child is being neglected and their parent is not making sure they get to school, that's a problem that needs to be dealt with. Is the solution to then throw their parents in jail and then they go into the foster system? Obviously not. But it's not about helping those kids. It's about taking revenge on those parents. It's about,
Right.
little Kamala, and that little girl was hers, and now she's going to take revenge for whatever happened to little Kamala Harris. And it's really, really unhealthy. And she has given herself license to engage in all kinds of very immoral and cruel acts and be indifferent to the results. Now, I, in the book, say it's pretty clear that that has something to do with a man that no one's talking about at all named Donald Harris. And that is her father. Her mother is now deceased, but her father is 85 years old, and he lives in Jamaica. And he denounced her 2020 presidential campaign. He's estranged from her. He wants nothing to do with her. His entire Jamaican family denounced her. And there's a lot there. And the fact that her father doesn't like her and that she doesn't like her father and all of that, I think has a lot to do with the desire for vengeance, and particularly who she has doled it out against, largely African-American men, because the rise in mass incarceration, as she was rising up the ranks of the California criminal justice system in the 90s, who was getting locked up? Black men like her father.
Yeah, you get into this very interesting kind of psychoanalysis of how the last 4 presidents have had kind of parallel lives or similar family dynamics. And the point you make is that their family experience left them needy for approval. And that's part of why the establishment or the deep state, what have you, chose them, because they had easy buttons to push.
And that sounds a little like conspiratorial and tinfoil hatty if you think about it. They don't care about my personality or your personality or your personality. But if we were president of the United States, our personality would be quite important, because the decisions we make mean billions of dollars and maybe millions of lives on the line. And it is interesting to see that there's a parallel. So Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, both of them have a single mother. They don't know their fathers. Their single mother gets married, and they have a stepfather who abuses, and there's domestic violence against their mother. Eventually, the stepfather marriage ends, and they're still with their mother. Both of them, at a young age, learn that they're very, very good, charismatic speakers, and that they've always kind of been there for their mom, right? They're the one cheering up their mom, getting their mom through hardship, and their mothers push them to succeed, and they both end up in Ivy League schools, and they both end up being president of the United States. Interesting parallel. And their abilities are also very similar. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama are very good at being radical in tone and moderate in deed and words, right? When Barack Obama was speaking in 2008, you thought it was going to be a revolution. I mean, it was the most amazing thing. But if you actually listen to what he was saying standard Democratic Party liberal stuff. Bill Clinton also, he was fighting for the working man. But if you actually listen to what he was saying, it was actually quite a move to the right in terms of economic policies and stuff from what the Democratic Party was doing. And he set up the Democrat Leadership Council that was like purging the Democratic Party of your Bernie Sanders types. And so, but they're both very good at getting people excited and getting, being there and cheering people up. And it's all about hope, right? Bill Clinton, a little place called hope, right? Barack Obama, hope and change, and it's all about, right? They're very good at that. Now, Donald Trump and George W. Bush also have a similar life story in that they both had very high achieving fathers. They knew their fathers, and their fathers were a big deal, right? George Herbert Walker Bush, CIA director, president of the United States. And Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, this huge real estate magnate, big property owner in New York City. And both of them, they have multiple brothers, and both of them are viewed as the screw up son. Right? Jeb Bush was the one that the Bush parents really liked. He was the one that they all thought would be president. George W., on the other hand, didn't do so well in school and had a drinking problem and got arrested at a football game for rowdy behavior and had a cocaine problem and started a baseball team that didn't go anywhere. And, that's George W. Bush, right? Donald Trump, as we know, his father sent him to military boarding school because he was such a discipline problem. And he spent his 20s as a party boy. He talked about how getting venereal disease was his own Vietnam, et cetera. And that, he was not viewed as the high achieving son of the Trump family, but he comes into adulthood with something to prove, and that Donald Trump is very desperate to get his face in the media and to show that he's very successful and that he's very rich. And that's how he becomes kind of an icon in the 80s and 90s in New York City media, because he's out there showing everyone how rich he is, etc. both George W. Bush and Donald Trump come into adulthood with this kind of damage as something to prove. So it's a different story that they knew their fathers, but they have something to prove. And so that's quite interesting when you then look at Kamala Harris and her story, because it lines up with Samantha Power. It lines up with Amy Klobuchar, and it's quite interesting. You know, Samantha Power also had a father. The parents split apart.
Just explain to our audience who Samantha Power is.
Samantha Power was the United Nations ambassador under Barack Obama, was an advisor in the Barack Obama White House, who was very key for pushing for military intervention in Libya. Her husband is Cass Sunstein, who's also a prominent advisor in the Barack Obama administration. Samantha Power has this same story. Amy Klobuchar has a similar story, and Amy Klobuchar also becomes a prosecutor around the same time period, and she's jailing people. And actually, Amy Klobuchar's trademark when she was the prosecutor, her trademark was that she would use what they called gang experts. And this is a really dirty thing that these prosecutors used to do. But some African-American man would be on trial for some crime, and they would bring in an expert witness who did not know anything about the crime, but was really good at telling horror stories that would scare the crap out of jurors, right? About the awful things that gangs do. Gangs are not nice, obviously. And so they would get one of these gang experts on the witness stand, and he would tell a bunch of stories about awful things that gangs do, blood and gore and crime and all of that. And these juries would sit there and they'd be horrified. And the subtle message is, if you acquit this guy, he might go out there and do something like this again, and juries would convict. And you have to remember, the other thing to remember about the criminal justice system, that, again, a lot of people think they know about the U.S. legal system by watching police shows, and that is not reality, right? In the United States, if you go to trial, that is the dramatic exception, okay? Very rarely does anyone go to trial. Almost everyone makes a plea bargain. If someone goes to trial, something's off. Now, in California,
because
they
the
have the three
prosecutors
strike law.
load you up with charges to terrify you.
Yeah, it's like 95% of cases make a plea deal. Now, in California, you have the 3 strikes law. So if it's your third strike, if it's a felony, you're going to jail for 25 years. So, you would obviously want to go to trial for your third strike. If you're very wealthy, you can afford to spend 2 years going to court and having court dates and paying attorneys and all of that. But very rarely do people ever go to trial. So if somebody is going through the difficulty of actually going to trial in the United States, there's a very good chance they're doing it because they really believe that they are innocent. And yet the conviction rate is astronomically high. I believe the Bronx in New York City has one of the lowest in the country, and it's a 2/3 conviction rate. So, and that's one of the lowest in the country. Pretty standard convictions. I mean, almost all trials have convictions. So, things are stacked against the defendants very, very much. And these prosecutors, and as somebody, I used to go to court with police brutality victims in Cleveland before I moved to New York City. And I would see how these prosecutors would operate. And it is pretty vicious. There was a police brutality case I worked on, where, there was a neighbor who went in to testify, against the police officers. And as she was leaving the courthouse, and this is like an elderly woman in her 70s, the police grab her and shove her against the wall and all of that for a warrant with somebody who has the same name as her, who's like 19 years old. They knew it wasn't her, but they just wanted to retaliate against her. How dare she testify? And the prosecutor is standing there and laughs about it and says, well, she deserved it. This is how they operate, right? And that these criminal prosecutors are very, very vicious. There's a real indifference to other people and their suffering. And that's Kamala Harris. And it takes a special kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, evil, psychopathy. I mean, it's not really psychopathy because there's feeling there. Sociopaths are just kind of indifferent and emotionless. Kamala Harris is very emotional. It's about her. I think about when you talk about narcissism, right? Where does the word narcissist come from? It's the story of Narcissa, right? Or Narcissus, right? He looks at the image of himself in a pool, and he's so transfixed by his own image that he just kind of forgets the rest of the world. That's a narcissist. They're so caught up in themselves. Right. And in some cases, and in a lot of cases, it's feeling sorry for themselves, feeling, that they just kind of, other people just kind of become background noise. They don't matter. That's Kamala Harris. And her narcissism manifests itself in a way in which she is completely indifferent to how her actions affect other people.
So you talked about how Tulsi Gabbard basically kamikazed Kamala Harris's 2020 campaign. She was going to have very limited time on that debate stage. And she chose to use it that way, even though Harris was not really in contention at that point. It had really already shaped up to be a race between Biden and Bernie. And you attribute that actually to her military background. And again, one of these deeper struggles that's going on between different elements of the deep state. So let's take a look at that knockout punch, and then we'll talk about why she did that.
Confronting Vice President Biden at the last debate, you called it a, quote, false accusation that Joe Biden is a racist. What's your response?
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response?
All right. And her response really goes to your point. You can see she has a personality
Attorney General
disorder.
of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why we created initiatives that were about reentering former offenders and getting them counseling. It is why, and because I know that criminal justice system is so broken, that I am an advocate for what we need to do to not only decriminalize, but legalize marijuana in the United States.
I want to bring Congresswoman Gabbard back in. Your response, ma'am?
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you are in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
I haven't been crazy about her work lately, but I can't take that away from her.
No, you certainly can't.
So can you talk about what you mean when you say it's not an accident that somebody coming from the military would have decided to take out Harris because there are elements in the Pentagon that don't like this Clintonian State Department agenda?
Well, it's interesting that you say you don't particularly like her work lately, because I agree with you, and we know what that's about, which is about her position on Israel-Palestine. But that actually matches what I'm about to lay out, because I think that Tulsi Gabbard represents a similar faction to General Michael Flynn and other people that were in the Trump camp that come out of the Pentagon. And their attitude is that Russia can be a very useful ally in fighting Islamic extremism and terrorism. And they were critical of U.S. foreign policy in Syria, because in Syria, you had a secular government, the Ba'athist Arab socialist government led by Bashar Assad, where Christians and Muslims and Alawites were living side by side. And the people trying to overthrow it were people with the Al-Qaeda, Wahhabi ideology. And so Tulsi Gabbard went to Syria. She met with the Syrian Social Nationalist Party and with the Syrian president, was widely attacked for doing that. And there was a feeling that, no, we don't want to overthrow the Syrian Arab Republic because it would be replaced with something that would be a fountainhead of terrorism and would lead to more 9/11s and more ISIS, etc. And that Russia has been dealing with Islamic extremism for quite some time. I mean, we know Osama bin Laden launched his career in Afghanistan fighting the Soviet Union, and that Chechen separatists funded by Saudi Arabia and funded and backed by the United States government are something that Russia's had to deal with. Russia is of all the countries in the world that are not Muslim countries, Russia has the most Muslims. Now, I've heard some people say maybe India has more, but it's close. And that, that there are a lot of Muslims in Russia, and Putin is very popular among Muslims in Russia. But, you know, when it comes to people that have been backed by the United States or backed by outside actors to try and overthrow Russia, Islamic extremist forces have been a big part of it. And so Russia is very good at tracking those folks. So much so that when the Boston bombing happened, Russia pointed out they had warned the American government about the Tsarnaev brothers because they were Chechens. They were Chechen and they were tied to Chechen separatism. Their parents had fought against the Soviet Union and that they had been monitoring. They'd seen them in online web forums and stuff. And they knew those Tsarnaev brothers were potentially dangerous and that there are a lot of people in the military who joined because they don't want things like 9/11 to happen. Right. They honestly believe they want to keep us safe. Right. And then when Obama was president, they very much saw that U.S. foreign policy was not about keeping us safe. In fact, we were giving guns and weapons to the very ideology that they were trying to protect us from. I remember I was at a protest in 2013 in Washington, D.C., when they were preparing, you know, there was the possibility of bombing Syria after the allegations of a chemical weapons attack. There was a woman who walked up to the protests and she said, "I agree with you guys. I'm an FBI Arab translator." And she gives us a thumbs up because she's listening. She can hear in these tapes they're playing of the glorious Syrian rebels. She knows what they're chanting, and they're chanting things like "death to Christians," you know, death to Alawites. You know, I mean, these were not fighters for democracy and freedom. They were extremists. Well, Tulsi Gabbard, Michael Flynn, and there's a number of voices in the Pentagon that you can think of that feel this way. And of course, that would also translate to a position of supporting Israel against the Palestinians. You see the Palestinians as Muslim terrorists. So it kind of matches what you're saying about Tulsi Gabbard, and that there's a fear that if there's another Arab Spring, if there's another, you know, effort to bring down a bunch of these populist governments like Anne Marie Slaughter, the intellectual behind the Hillary Clinton State Department, wants to do, the result will be more refugees, more instability, and more chaos. The Libyan intervention, I really wish people could wrap their minds around what happened in Libya in 2011. Libya was the most prosperous country on the African continent, the highest life expectancy. They had built the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River. They had wiped out illiteracy. They had done amazing things. Gaddafi, the leader of this anti-colonial revolution, he had nationalized the oil, and he was using the oil money to build Libya up into a prosperous country. And then a protest movement started and they bombed Libya. And now that country is in complete and utter chaos. How long has it been since 2011? The country is, it's still a mess.
Slave
and
markets.
People die trying to get out of Libya in the Mediterranean. They drown in the Mediterranean trying to die. And like you said, modern day slave markets. Like what happened in Libya, which Samantha Power and Cass Sunstein and Ben Rhodes brag about how they convinced Barack Obama to do it reluctantly. What happened there was atrocious. And Barack Obama even said when he was leaving office, his greatest regret as president was going into Libya, he said, without a clear plan. It was an absolute disaster, and the beneficiaries of it were largely terrorist groups. ISIS recruited heavily out of those forces, the Al-Qaeda wing of things. I mean, it was a disaster, and terrorism and weapons and all kinds of things spread throughout the African continent. And when we talk about personalities, Ben Rhodes, in his memoir of the Obama presidency, describes pretty well how they got Obama to do it. And they said, to Obama that that Benghazi was the city that had been seized by the rebels. And Gaddafi had said in a speech, he said, when we retake Benghazi, we're going to go house to house. Now, he meant we're going to track down the rebels and the terrorists. But they told Barack Obama, when he said house to house, they meant they were going to kill every person in the city. He was going to commit genocide. And they worked on Barack Obama for 3 days, saying there's going to be a genocide. Gaddafi's going to kill every single person in Benghazi, and you're going to be remembered as the guy who didn't stop it. The first black president didn't stop a genocide in Africa. Oh, my goodness. And, and they worked on him. And I think his damage about having watched his stepfather, Lolo Soetoro, beat his mother, Ann Dunham, and not being able to do anything about it because he was a child probably had a lot to do with the buttons that they pushed. And that they knew how to work on Barack Obama, and they got Barack Obama to do something that he later greatly regretted, which has had catastrophic consequences for the world. So knowing how to push the buttons and knowing how to psychoanalyze the person who's in the Oval Office is quite important.
Tusker, you had a question.
Yeah. And this is kind of more broad because one of the reasons why I'm excited that your book has kind of caught on is for exactly this reason. It's not just about Kamala Harris. It's about a much deeper analysis of politics and the class forces behind and all those interests. But I did just want to ask you in general about anti-imperialism. Why has anti-imperialism historically been such a core component of class politics? And what is the difference between being anti-war and being anti-imperialist?
Well, my understanding is that imperialism refers to a system, capitalism in its monopolistic stage. And it's very interesting because that is the classical Marxist-Leninist understanding, right? Lenin talks about imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And what really defines imperialism is holding back economic development. It's preventing countries from being able to take control of their own economy and resources, and instead having what he calls the export of capital, where instead of, it used to be we exported tires or we exported cars. Now we export the corporation, right? McDonald's is spread all over the world. We don't export French fries, we export McDonald's, right? And it's about the export of capital and preventing countries from developing their own industries and keeping countries in poverty, holding back economic development. Now, that was the understanding that the Bolsheviks and the Soviet Union had. And that's why right after the Bolsheviks took power, they gave military support to the Emir of Afghanistan. And he was a conservative monarchist, but he was fighting the British Empire. And they said, that works for us. And they convened the Congress of the Peoples of the East in Baku. And they said, hey, if you're going to fight the British Empire, we're with you because imperialism is the enemy. And when you talk about being a component of class politics, you can even go back to Marx, right? In Marx's day, Ireland was fighting for its independence. And Karl Marx, he wrote a very important letter where he said the duty of working class radicals and Marxists and socialists in Britain is to support the Irish freedom struggle everywhere and to get the English workers to see the victory of the Irish people against the British Empire, not as a question of abstract justice, but as a matter of their own liberation, right? I think A.J. Muste, who was a kind of a Christian socialist pacifist, he would say our real enemy is at home. And that is what anti-imperialism is. It's the understanding that these countries around the world that are struggling against the domination of big banks and corporations from the West are our allies in the struggle against the big corporations here. Right. And that ultimately, we don't have an interest in helping, ExxonMobil, BP and Bank of America take over the world. And in fact, we're getting screwed by Bank of America and ExxonMobil right here. And so we have a common interest with people around the world that are struggling against them. Now, that was the classical Marxist-Leninist understanding, but I've been to Iran where they are definitely not Marxists. They are very religious. But, they studied Lenin in Iran and they studied the economics of imperialism. And, Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic, he talked about American economic imperialism. And the Bolivarian countries, they are socialists, but they incorporate Roman Catholicism, indigenous ideology. They have this understanding. And, you go around the world today, the classic Soviet-style Marxism is not really in fashion anymore. But this understanding of what imperialism is and that it's a system, that is very much the global understanding. And I do maintain that understanding. I'm at the point where, it's funny, I wrote this book 4 years ago. I don't call myself a communist as much now because, I know what I believe. My beliefs haven't changed. But if you say communist now, people think you're woke. And I'm not. I'm not woke. And I've been to communist countries. They are not woke. But it used to be in America, if I told people I was a communist, they would say, how could you be that? And I could say, well, let me tell you all about it. Nowadays, if I tell people I'm a communist, they go, oh, I know what you are. You're 17, you have purple hair, and you think all Republicans are Nazis, and you're obsessed with the trans thing. That ain't me. That's not what I believe. And it ain't what they believe in Venezuela. It's not what they believe in Vietnam. It's not what they believe in China. It's not what the countries around the world struggling against imperialism believe. So the term that I've started to use to describe myself, I say that I am an innovationist. Because if you look at the world, right, the underlying question, and this is what that last 10 pages that you didn't get to, Russell, are about, is that human beings...
That's what I said, the reveal.
Yeah, human beings are creative creatures. We are constantly reinventing our relationship with our environment. And human technology, we're constantly moving to a higher plane. Ants have been building their ant farms the same way for thousands of years. Beavers have been making their beaver dams the same way for thousands of years. But in just 7,000 or 8,000 years, we've gone from hunter-gatherers in the woods to space travel, to iPhones, to artificial intelligence. We constantly reinvent our relationship with Mother Nature to make it serve us in a more efficient way, to expand our population, to increase our life expectancy, to make life more comfortable. That is the nature of what it means to be a human being, as we're constantly trying to expand. And right now we are in a crisis because human brilliance has outstripped the narrow horizons, the narrow limits of production organized for profit. And what we need is a rationally organized economy so we can keep inventing, keep expanding, keep having our life expectancy grow, keep expanding our population. Well, taking it back to that Eastern establishment, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the British Empire, they say that the solution right now is that we have to degrow. We have to reduce consumption because the problem is that there's too many people. They are not Marxists, they are Malthusians, right? They blame the economic crisis that we're in the world on overpopulation, and that their solution to save the global economic system and conveniently let them stay at the top of it is to prevent growth around the world. And they see anti-imperialist countries that have broken out of their system, as the main target. Because what are they doing? They're growing. That's what they do. When countries break out of Western domination and imperialism, they start growing and building and electrifying and wiping out illiteracy and bringing their people up. And that is seen as a threat to the environment. And Biden openly said so when he was running for president. If you read his essay, America Must Lead Again, he said, we're going to stop China from building power plants in Africa, right? That's what they want. To save their system, they want degrowth. And that is what fascism is. And that is what fascism has always been. Fascism is not an aesthetic. Fascism is not being racist. People have been racist before. People have been militaristic and authoritarian before. Fascism is when, in a long-term economic crisis, the government kind of locks down society and forcibly degrows, right? They created a slave labor underclass in Nazi Germany. They forced women out of the workforce to get rid of unemployment. They rebooted the economy by creating, lots of military spending. Fascist economics is trying to save the capitalist system with forcible, heavy-handed degrowth. And I must say, I agree with a lot of what Trumper folks say, but they seem to think that this Malthusianism from the World Economic Forum and all of that is Marxism and communism. And I have the painful and difficult task of saying, well, actually, it's not. And if you go to any Marxist or communist country, that's clearly not the case. But that is what the woke people believe. And a lot of them think they're Marxists. So I can understand why you're confused, right? And I can understand why it's confusing. And also, let me add that socialism in our time and anti-imperialism, a really big part of it nowadays is small business owners, right? Vietnam, the way they've had their economic miracle is with their enabling people to start their own businesses. They call it a socialist-oriented market economy. Nicaragua, I've been there. I was an elections monitor there. They have what they call a micro entrepreneurship program where the government loans money to people to start their own businesses, worker cooperatives, and that is the strength of their socialist economy in Nicaragua. And the 21st century socialism is all about enabling people to start their own business and be creative and all of that, and subsidizing them in doing so in coordination with an overall planned economy. So the state is kind of making sure there's constantly growth. And then what is the ultimate goal? Is a world with so much growth and so much wealth that the need for a government can fade away, that people can just do what they feel like doing. Labor becomes life's prime want, meaning people work to entertain themselves, to get joy from being creative, not because it's a necessity. A society where there's so much wealth and abundance that there's really no need for anyone to hoard anything, and everyone's pretty much equal because there's enough for everybody. That's the ultimate goal. And Marx talked about the higher stage of communism. He's talking about a world of vast wealth and vast abundance, right? And so I tell people I'm an innovationist because I believe innovation is the essence of what I'm for. I believe in human beings and our creative power. And I believe that we can revolutionize our relationship with the environment and get to a higher plane. And, I think that's what it means to be a socialist or a communist in our time, but that's not what it means to most people. So I now, my organization is called the Center for Political Innovation, and I'm saying I'm an innovationist.
Well, I think something most people, I myself didn't really know this until I got to know more communists. They tend to be pro-growth and pro-industry and pro-innovation and pro-technology. And I think that's very different from the idea that people have of them. And in keeping with what you got into with this kind of long-term social engineering project towards accommodating people to degrowth. I'm very curious what your take on this is. Now, I am completely supportive of trans rights, gay rights. It's not about that. We've gone beyond that to promotion, as we'll get into later with our Olympics segment. Do you think that's a degrowth strategy?
I don't know if I would call it degrowth. One thing I will say is, my understanding of the Marxist understanding of the family is that Marx dissects, he talks about how there's base and superstructure, right? And that all the institutions kind of reflect the underlying economic system, right? Under feudalism, we had absolute monarchies. Hunter-gatherer civilization, we lived in tribes. Capitalism, we have liberal democratic republics. And that there's nothing like eternal. Right? There's no like sacred way of doing things. And I remember when I was a kid growing up, I would see people, they had this bumper sticker and it would say marriage equals one man plus one woman. And that would have a Bible verse. And I would always laugh about that. And I'd say, funny, how many wives did Moses have? How many wives did Ezekiel have? How many, read the Old Testament. Those guys, wasn't one man plus one woman. It was one man plus many, many women. And that, the family has changed. And under hunter-gatherer civilization, the whole tribe was kind of a family. And then you have polygamy, and now we have monogamy, and now we're increasingly having gay marriage. And in the idea that there's this magical sacred way that it always is, Marx kind of takes that apart. And that's the Marxist teaching of the family. That's it, right? And it's the understanding that as society changes, the family will also change. But it's important to note that in the Soviet Union, they were all about family values. There was the Soviet family before the nuclear family, right? And they outlawed homosexuality, they outlawed abortion, and they gave a medal to women who had more than 10 children. And the Soviet Union, starting around 1927, they got to be rather socially conservative out of necessity. You had a population there, a largely peasant population that had been very conservative and very religious. And yes, you had the Bolsheviks who were these radical. They were trying to do the free love, abolish marriage thing for a while, but it wasn't going to work. And Stalin was kind of the compromise. He was a Bolshevik, but he was from Georgia. He grew up in a small village. His father made shoes for a living, and he could do both. He was a good speaker and a writer, but he was also from the people. He was a mass organizer. And Stalin, his leadership was kind of a compromise between the deep conservatism of the Russian people and the radical leftism of the Bolsheviks and the Marxist movement. And communism in the 20th century was this kind of weird merger of deep conservatism and radical leftist economics that worked out very well and enabled a lot of countries to electrify and industrialize and get over that first hurdle of becoming modern countries. So when it comes to the trans rights thing, I don't think it's a degrowth agenda. I don't think there's enough trans people that are losing their fertility, that it's about reducing the population. I think it is a way to be radical and not change anything when it really gets down to it, right? If we're changing the way we look at gender, if we're changing that, we're not challenging the power of big corporations. We're not restructuring the wage system. We're not cutting into the power of any rich people. We're just kind of, figuring out how to get people to think about things differently. And I mean, I will also say that, the trans thing, my heart goes out to anyone who goes through that. I've known people who go through that, and it's very difficult, and they need, love and kindness. And I respect them and their doctors making the choices they want to make. You have to admit there's a lot of money to be made off that. There's a lot of money to be made off of that. And that's what makes me suspicious. And the other thing that I am a little bit suspicious of is, while I have always been against bullying, I have always been in favor of giving people love and letting people be who they are. It is weird that there's this demand. And I remember when the left became kind of wokeified, every leftist space, every meeting must start with pronouns, it's never enough. You can say, I support trans rights, and then you have 100 people tweeting at you about how you said it the wrong way and you're a bad person. I mean, it's nuts.
Yes. And you get into that more broadly, not specifically around that issue, but you get into how part of this kind of effort by the intelligence services was to create a left that puts on the affectations of radicalism without it being directed towards any destabilizing purpose. And it seems like that's very much where we are now. Now, you talked about Trump at one point as another version of the cruel narcissism that you see in Kamala Harris. Now, I saw you on Kim Iverson. You said that you've changed some of your opinions about Trump. I don't know if that's one of them. So what did you mean? Do you stand by that?
Well, we've learned a lot about Trump since he left office, right? I will say what I took Trump to task for in the book, I do stand by. I took him to task over his rhetoric around immigrants and his use of this, the lyrics to this jazz song about, the snake, and kind of, I felt it was almost like a warning against compassion. It was like saying compassion is weakness. I referenced Ayn Rand, and I have always found that aspect of the right wing to be particularly disturbing. This idea that if you care about other people, you want to help other people, you're a weak person, the virtue of selfishness, etc. But I will say, when it comes to foreign policy, Trump did a lot of bad things as president, murdering Qasem Soleimani, bringing us to the brink of war with Iran, moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, but now we're starting to learn that, one of the people who was very much key in pushing Trump to do those things was a guy named John Bolton. And John Bolton, is somebody who eventually turned against Trump. Now he says he supports Trump again, but he betrayed Trump. Trump sees him. And Mike Pompeo also, supported the prosecution of Donald Trump, supported the raid on Mar-a-Lago, and that Mike Pompeo and, John Bolton and the people that were pushing Trump to do these bad things, they're the ones that turned against him. The other thing is, when it comes to Venezuela, for example, right? Trump was not good to Venezuela, but he finally just said, I'm tired of this. I want to move on. After the food truck, do you remember that, right? So all the anti-Venezuelan folks, they had a food truck on the border, and they were going to cross the border, and then they lit it on fire themselves. It was a false flag. And Max Blumenthal caught it on video and showed that, no, they lit their own food truck on fire. And after that, Donald Trump was kind of like, you know what? I'm bored of Venezuela. Can we just not talk about this? And of course, the deep state folks were like, what? No, what do you mean? Overthrowing Venezuela is what we're all about. And he's like, yeah, I'm just kind of bored about this. And I think Trump noticed it wasn't a big winner in the polls. Well, it might win him points in Miami. With most Americans, they're not sitting there going, I sure wish the president would overthrow the government of Venezuela. That's what I want, and that Donald Trump, when it really gets down to it, Donald Trump is, I think, in a lot of ways a narcissist, but his narcissism is our best hope right now. He is thinking, how am I going to be remembered, especially now that he's getting older? If he has a second term, he's thinking, how are they going to look back on me in history? He wants to be remembered as a guy who did good things for the country, who made peace. That's why he was so desperate to go to North Korea and meet with Kim Jong-un. I think you guys are out in L.A. Are you out in L.A., Los Angeles?
No. I'm in New York. She's in Arkansas.
Okay. Yeah.
And Keaton's upstate.
I was out in LA a couple months ago. I gave a talk at Los Angeles Family Church. That's a church that was very supportive of peace on the Korean Peninsula. And they invited me out there. And I mean, this is a church that's very anti-communist historically, but they gave me the podium to give a talk about the potential for peace on the Korean Peninsula in a second Trump administration. I was really honored to go out there and speak to a crowd of, people of different backgrounds and others out there in Los Angeles. And that Trump wants to be remembered as a guy who made peace. Kamala has attacked Trump for meeting with Kim Jong-un. She called it a photo op. It was horrible. Mm-hmm. How dare he? Donald Trump wants to be remembered as a guy who made peace. One thing I will say about Trump, and I think this is interesting, is that Nixon was president when Donald Trump was kind of in his formative years. And Donald Trump kind of wants to be Nixon, which is interesting because Nixon actually did a lot of good things as president. Now, he did a lot of bad things too. He crushed the Black freedom struggle. He, bombed Vietnam massively, but then he pulled out of Vietnam.
Wow.
And he lowered the voting age to 18. And he created the Office of Workplace Health and Safety. And, Richard Nixon actually enacted a lot of policies that were quite beneficial because he was trying to hold the country together. And he even advocated a guaranteed minimum income for all citizens. Yep. And he held on to that even into his second term. He was advocating that. And it was pretty clear that when he was ousted, the replacement of Richard Nixon by Gerald Ford, that's where Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney first got into D.C. That's also where Ayn Rand came to the White House with Alan Greenspan. And Alan Greenspan had his first job, the guy who went on to, wreck our economy in 2008. And that the overthrow of Richard Nixon was a victory for neoliberal economics, right? The Milton Friedman, privatize everything. It's always better. Hey, what's the problem with having prisons for profit? People getting paid for people getting locked up. What could possibly go wrong, right? And why not have private companies wage our wars, right? We don't need a military. Let's have private companies go and wage our wars. What could possibly go wrong with that? That kind of thinking really took effect after Nixon was ousted. So that's kind of important to keep in mind. But Nixon, when he met with Mao Zedong, he went to China, he said to Mao that no Democrat could do what he did,
Right.
because they would be called a communist. And Mao said to Nixon, he said, "You're a rightist." He said, "I like rightists." That's a quote from Mao Zedong. "I like rightists." And what he meant was, when I sit down with a rightist, they tell me what they really believe. And when I sit down with these liberals, they give me a two-faced song and dance that's, dreamed up in a strategic institute. So I think it's very interesting. Look, Trump could be a lot worse in his second term, but he could potentially be a lot better. We will have to see. I think there's a very good chance that Trump will win the upcoming election if it's a fair election. So, I think anything would be better than Kamala Harris. I'll give you my opinion right there, but I'm not going to endorse a lot of things Trump says and does. So there you go.
All right. So let's end on an observation about Kamala Harris. See if you can give us some hope. I'm gonna read one more thing from your book here. There's your observation of the modern left, or part of it. In the absence of class solidarity and economic, what is that? Okay, of socialism as central planning and construction, many have voted that leftism has largely, thank you there, Jake, economic notions of socialism as central planning and construction. Many have noted that leftism has largely degenerated to a form of victimology. Various forms of oppression, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, mistreatment of the disabled, and body shaming are denounced and studied in great depth. In left-wing discourse, individuals are given permission to feel that they have been victimized for this unfairness and unleash their rage. They get to satisfy their impulse toward aggression by exacting revenge for their perceived oppression. So this is not only your analysis of the modern so-called left, that's pretty much your analysis of Kamala Harris. And I think part of why you are so vehement that she must not come into power. But now I look around at who the people are who think of themselves as left, and they are all, as you describe, there. Is there any hope of rebuilding a left that has class and economic analysis? Because that has just been crushed. There are so few people who think of themselves as left who have anything to say about economics or class anymore.
There's always been two souls of what you might call the left. There's been a populist soul, and there has been a intellectual, middle-class, nonconformist soul. And that's always been just a reality of what leftist politics means. This whole notion of left and right, it comes from the French Revolution. After the revolution, they created a National Assembly. People who are still loyal to the king sat on the right, and the more radical people who embraced the French Revolution, the Jacobins and others, they sat on the left. And that became a designation. And I think the unleashing of impulses, the libidinal release, it was very effective in bringing down feudalism. Feudalism is a very controlled society. The peasant can't even look the landlord in the face. There's different words that they use, a very hierarchical, traditional way where people are kind of holding themselves in, not expressing their true feelings, certainly not releasing their sexual impulses. And the French Revolution comes along and it says, let it all out, right? The world's been unfair to you. Rise up and revolt. And the color red becomes associated with it, because what's red the color of, right? It's the color of sexual passion. It's the color of rage and anger. And that unleashing people's libido, I guess you could call it, was a very effective mechanism for bringing down feudalism. But in our time, that has now become the main tool that the imperialists use in destabilizing the world. That's what the Hillary Clinton State Department was doing with Facebook and Twitter. They were using Facebook and Twitter to give people permission to unleash their rage and tear down, governments all over the world. And I talk a lot, especially in the third chapter of the book, about another Freudian concept they talk about parental transference. Right. And, it seems like, when you're a child, the most important relationship you have is with your parents. Right. And that affects your relationship with people throughout your life, as you'll project your parents onto other people. But I think what a lot of people in the country right now are longing for is a president that they could look up to like a good father would be. And I talk about Roosevelt and I talk about Lincoln and how, they projected a very, very different vibe. One thing I didn't mention in the book, but it's important to discuss, is that, Franklin Roosevelt, this great president, who was a social reformer, was probably the most socialist friendly president we ever had. He met with communist labor organizers at the White House, and he enabled his wife to go forward and talk about Jim Crow at a time where that was completely taboo. And Roosevelt would not have been who he was. He was a child of wealth and privilege from a very powerful family, but he went to a boarding school in New England that was run by a man named Endicott Peabody, who ran this very effective boarding school for boys. And Endicott Peabody was what they called a Christian socialist. He was a Christian and a socialist. He wasn't a Marxist, but he was an advocate of Christian socialism. And as a young man, Roosevelt was, sent out to do charity work. He was taught the value of having compassion and empathy for other people. And I think the Roosevelt presidency can largely be seen as a result, in some ways, of his relationship with Endicott Peabody. Endicott Peabody presided over Roosevelt's marriage. He also presided over a church service during Roosevelt's inaugurations. And that he had this relationship with his, school headmaster, who was a Christian socialist for his whole life. And that, words like Christian socialist, that would seem like almost an oxymoron nowadays, right? Socialist is supposed to mean you just want rebellion or whatever. But that used to be a very common thing in the United States. The Pledge of Allegiance was written by a Christian socialist, Francis Bellamy. He wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. And if the words of the Pledge of Allegiance were actually considered, they were a giant FU to the Confederacy. Right? I pledge allegiance to the flag in the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, like no confederacy, one nation, indivisible, like no confederacy, with liberty and justice for all, i.e. no slaves. It was designed to be a giant FU to the Confederacy, and it was written by a socialist. So the idea that you can love your country, that you can have Christian faith and advocate a socialist planned economy, that didn't used to be something that people considered to be off limits. And, I think we need to re-examine what left and right really mean. I always considered myself to be of the left. I grew up in a conservative small town surrounded by Bush supporters and conservatives, and I was very opposed to that. But, over the last few years, I've gotten to the point where I am a conservative person, but I don't believe in the free market. I don't believe in capitalism, and I certainly don't believe in imperialism. And there's a lot of interesting ideas around the world. Our understanding of politics in America is very shallow. Right? I mean, right. Dinesh D'Souza does these documentaries about every bad person in history who was actually a Democrat. Right. It's very silly, right? It's like you can be a liberal or a conservative. It's like politics is much bigger than that. Alexander Dugin, for example, right? He's this Russian thinker who's an advisor to Russian President Putin. I've met Alexander Dugin. Dugin, he talks about what he calls the fourth political theory. And he has an understanding that draws heavily from both the left and the right, trying to develop an alternative to the Western system. And if you look at China today, Mao hated Confucius. Confucius was a symbol of, authoritarianism and filial piety and all this. And, but now they've got statues of Confucius and statues of Mao almost right next to each other because they're both part of China's battlefields of the Donbass right now. They've got tanks where they've got this Orthodox flag with an icon of Jesus on it, and they've got the hammer and sickle of the old Soviet Union right next to each other because they're both part of Russia, a civilization that's been around for, thousands of years, and Stalin and the great czars and Ivan the Terrible and Alexander Nevsky and all of that are part of the outside of 20th century political boxes because we need to save our country. I love my country. I do love my country. I don't love the government. I don't love, what it does around the world in terms of militarism, but I love the people here. And I think our ultimate interest is building a new America outside of the rule of big banks and corporations, an America where the economy is organized as expression of patriotism. Put me in whatever category you want. That's what I want. I want the best for my country. You can't be an internationalist without being a patriot. Because if you want what's best for the world, that means you want what's best for your country because your country is part of the world. And you can't be a patriot to be getting along with other countries and treating them fairly. So there is no contradiction between patriotism and internationalism, right? It's national chauvinism, thinking your country is better than some other country. That's one thing. And I don't like that. We always say, this is the greatest country in the world. That's a rather vulgar thing that we say. As for my country, in the context of wanting a better world, I think that walks hand in hand. So those are my thoughts, and that's the perspective from which I wrote this book. I will end by saying this. I don't know what the next shoe to drop on this book is, right? Because this is weird. The fact that I don't know what the next shoe to drop is. You know, I've been to Russia a number of times. I work at RT, but I'll tell you, I wrote this all by myself. No Russian had anything to do with this book. This book is not Russian propaganda. And the Russian friends I have, if I had gone to them and said, hey, I'm doing this, they would have tried to stop me. I can almost guarantee you they would have said, don't publish that. Don't rock the boat. So that maybe the next shoe to drop is that this is all a big Kremlin conspiracy to rig our elections or something like that. Well, first of all, I wrote it 4 years ago, right? And I didn't change anything, and they just took it down now. So I would have had to have conspired.
Joy Reid has told us the Russians can time travel.
Okay.
They went back and altered her old blog post to put in homophobia.
There you go.
So, you know, you might be in with those time traveling Russians.
Well, there you go. Well, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for having me on. I really did enjoy
Thank
the
you. I
invitation.
knew we would find the uplift. The uplift at the end.
Yes.
Caleb, get in your plugs. Where can people find?
I'm a member of the Center for Political Innovation. It's the think tank or education project we started. Our website is cpiusa.org, Center for Political Innovation. Trying to spread the word about opposing war, 4-point plan to rescue the country. That's where you can find my stuff. I've got a website, calebmaupin.net. I'm streaming on YouTube a lot, and I'm out there. So thank you again for having me on.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much, Caleb.
Thanks, Caleb.
That was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you again soon. Thank you. All right, Jake, throw up the link for the book while it's top of mind. All right, so that is where you can get.
Yeah, did you guys get it? Right fast.
And there's Caleb's book. That was really, really an interesting interview. We're going to have more people on who are going to talk anti-imperialism and theory. All right, so let's get to some super chats. We got quite a lot of them, and everyone don't forget.
Russell, while you're doing that, I'm going to try. I've been having like a really nasty delay in my headset, so I'm going to try to switch out my headphones and see if that will correct my problem.
Fair enough. All right, and don't forget we have the Q&A tonight. We will be switching over to Rumble. We're not only going to switch over to Rumble because of the Q&A. We are also going to switch over to Rumble because the Olympics are censoring their own opening ceremony. So we're going to do our coverage of the Olympics in two parts. We're going to do the non-video part here, and then we will take a look at what I've been able to scrounge that they haven't been able to scrub from the internet on the Rumble side. All right, so yeah, I know all about this. Your sister group on Facebook, Do Your Due Dissidents, is being overrun by K-bots. I advise you mod them out or leftists will leave. This is Amadeus. So yeah, I've gotten DMs about this. So I went over there and I purged a few people. But I also left a note for everyone on that page. If there's anything I know about our audience, we have the smartest, funniest trolls in the business. You guys cannot side pocket these Kamala Harris K-Hive people. They are not hard to drive crazy. They are not hard to drive crazy. And anyone who read my note knows what I suggested about perhaps proposing to them that you heard that Kamala fornicated with a Chihuahua at a party to get her job as DA. So, you tell them something like that, they're gonna go nuts. Like, have fun with them. Like, what do you need me to intervene for? I don't understand. Those people dropping in, you should be eating them up like chocolate-covered cherries, the K-Hive. Congrats, Keaton, from the amazing Blumpkin. You hear that, Keaton? I hope he's not watching the show. That would be sad.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Marshall. Is he here? I hope he's not here. Elizabeth Marshall. I want the guy to take some time off because next year I'm going to China and I am not doing the show at all for like a month. Elizabeth Marshall. Great to see Caleb here. One of his YouTube lives helped me get through chores today. Cool. Paul Marciano. Hope Keaton and his family are doing well. Appreciate you running the show, Russell. Thank you. Well, don't say that yet. The night's young. JM. $2. Thank you, JM. Josh Love. Like that name. What impact will the RFK Jr. campaign have on the Harris campaign following her honeymoon period? Thanks for all you report on. It's brought me out of my bubble. Cool. I don't think it's going to have any meaningful impact. I think you're probably going to have more third-party voting than usual because the choices are so awful. I mean, they're just so awful. So that will probably benefit RFK. I don't know. I mean, last I saw, he was polling at what? It was something like 5% in the polls.
It's not much, and I feel like the things that I've seen have been that the polls are that he kind of tends to pull more from Trump than he pulls from Biden. And I don't know if you know anything about that.
I've seen different things about that. Like, yeah, supposedly. I mean, I don't know. People are to be so disgusted by these choices. I mean, even 5% is a lot for a third-party candidacy.
It is.
So if he does actually get 5%, that's not bad. All right, Kawhi Cowboy. Congrats to Keaton and fam, and feliz cumpleaños, Chavez. Venezuela delivered a great victory, and the Bolivarian revolution continues. Viva anti-imperialism, viva la paz. I saw some pictures of the rallies. We'll cover that on Tuesday. Thank you, Kawhi Cowboy. Not provided. One of my friends showed me pictures of Kamala Harris with Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah, it's photoshopped. That's a fake picture. It's actually a picture of her with her husband is the original picture. Believe me, we'd be covering it if that
right.
All right, Sparky. Kamala Kushner,
Sparky.
24. Go. What there's Penny Arcos. What do you make of El Mayo cartel arrest, Fishy? You know, I've been so busy. I saw like a headline. I don't know anything. I can't comment.
Yeah,
You, Tusker?
no, I've also been busy as well, so I cannot comment on that particular thing. I'll definitely look at it though.
We will. Maybe Tuesday. We'll do it. Sparky, narcissist. I know, and I almost interjected, but he was on a roll. I was like, who cares?
Yeah.
Sparky, speaking of narcissists, always reminds me of that Morris Day in the Time video, Jungle Love, where an assistant dancing in sync with the band holds a mirror up to Morris so he can check himself out. All right, so we will, to be continued, to get to our first post-interview story. Speaking of our illustrious once and future president, he had a rather interesting improv moment on stage this week. Trump tells Christians they won't have to vote after this election. So let's watch the video and see what he said.
And again, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
Okay. All right. This is my take, having watched Trump for 2 long hours in the hot sun in the Bronx.
You lucky duck.
Yeah. This guy just says shit. He just says whatever's top of mind. He doesn't really think about it. It's like a guy who just loves the attention. Okay, if you've ever gone to a comedy club where the comic just doesn't know when to get off stage. They're just drinking up the attention, and now they're getting into improv. They're off their material and they just start saying shit. That's my read. I'm not a Christian, but why would he say that? Like he just says stuff.
Yeah, that's more of my read on it. And actually I think it's kind of, I could see like the RNC strategists having this thing where it's like, no, don't demobilize the base, like, because that's one of the bases. So what he's basically, to me, what he was saying is he was saying, you guys just don't worry about it. I'm going to have everything so taken care of. You're not even going to have any more issues to vote on by the next time you got to vote.
Yeah,
that's how I read it.
Yeah, that's what I think. Something along those lines. But hey, we always want to be fair on this show.
Sure.
You very often get the people saying, well, Biden says crazy stuff. Why don't you say anything about Trump? I mean, yeah, sure. My only argument has always been, I don't think it's cognitive decline. He always talked like this.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing new. So to pick up a little bit on this Reuters article about
we kind of jumped the gun on that one, didn't we, with the commentary?
Yeah, well, no, not really. It was not clear what the former president, because they describe what he said, so I just showed it. It was not clear what the former president meant by his remarks in an election campaign where his Democratic opponents accuse him of being a threat to democracy, and after his attempt to overturn his 2020 defeat to President Joe Biden, an effort that led to the deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Trump was speaking at an event organized. It's Godwin's law, man. Everything leads back to January 6th. Trump was speaking at an event organized by the conservative group Turning Point Action in West Palm Beach, Florida. Campaign spokesperson Stephen Chung did not directly address Trump's remarks when asked to clarify them. Chung said Trump, quote, was talking about uniting this country. That's a tough gig, man. And blamed the divisive political environment on the attempted assassination of Trump 2 weeks ago. Investigators have yet to give a motive for why the 20-year-old gunman opened fire on Trump. In an interview with Fox News in December, Trump said that if he won the November 5th election, he would be a dictator, but only on day one, to close the southern border with Mexico and expand oil drilling. Democrats have seized on that comment. Trump has since said the remarks were a joke. If Trump wins a second term in the White House, he can serve only 4 more years as president. U.S. presidents are limited to 2 terms, consecutive or not, under the Constitution. In May, speaking at a National Rifle Association gathering, Trump quipped about serving more than 2 terms as president. He referred to the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt, a Democrat, the only president to serve more than 2 terms. The 2-term limit was added after Roosevelt's presidency. Quote, FDR, 16 years, almost 16 years. He was 4 terms. I don't know. Are we going to be considered 3-term or 2-term? Trump asked the NRA crowd. Trump's remarks on Friday pointed to the need for both parties to energize their base voters ahead of what will likely be a closely fought election. Trump has enjoyed loyal support from evangelicals in the past 2 elections. The race has abruptly tightened after the decision by Biden to end his re-election bid, and with his vice president, Kamala Harris, becoming the presumptive Democratic nominee. Yeah, we don't really need the rest of that.
Yeah, we're good. We get the point.
We're good. We get the point.
Yeah.
So yeah, my read is that was Trump being Trump.
Yeah, I think, and it's just, and that's just kind of the thing. He's sort of bombastic, and he gets up there. He likes the attention. He wants to riff, and it's exactly what you said. A comedian that's just keeping it going too long. And I don't know if that'll change. I think there was some, at least element of him before Biden, like once Biden dropped out, he did kind of have maybe a reason to prolong his political talks just to kind of prove a point that like Biden can only do 20 minutes whenever he's called once every 2 months to do so, but he can do it consistently. So I don't know if he's going to kind of pare that down a little bit if he doesn't feel like he needs to showcase that aspect of his campaign.
Yeah, especially when you know that what they're trying to hang on you is that you're going to be a dictator in Project
Right.
2025. It's almost like he can't help himself. It's like the hot stove. He has to put his hand on it.
Yeah, he just has to poke. He just has to keep poking. There is kind of part of me that
I mean, that
thinks
was
that
the
he
most
does
honest
that.
thing I think I've ever heard him say. I'm not a Christian.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, just saying that out loud. I mean, but you guys do whatever. I love you guys. I mean, that's just kind of who he is.
All right. So let's Jake, actually let's go to the patron scroll. Because we are at about the halfway point or further than the halfway point. So it is because of you, our patrons, that we're able to do this. Thank you. I was is the patron scroll out tonight. Don't forget, if you can't be an athlete, at least be an athletic supporter. Support the show. You can sign up at Patreon, Locals, Substack, all that good stuff. Then you will get notifications for when we're going to be going live. We also do 2 patron shows a month with patron exclusive content. We're actually going to be doing the next one on Wednesday. So sign up for that. We also, now we're going to start, now that we got rid of the Wednesday regular show, we're going to start doing exclusive articles again. So you will get some of those. But it is because of you folks that we are able to do things like go to Chicago with the DNC. Everybody is going to this thing. This is probably the best year since 1968 to go to that convention. That is going to be nuts. By the way, we have Kit, speaking of Chicago, we have Kit joining us on Tuesday to fill in for Keaton. And on Thursday, our old friend Misty Winston will actually be sitting in the other chair. So
Misty can talk all about being a trad wife.
What's that?
I said Misty can talk all about being a trad wife.
I'm going to ask that's what I hear. That's what I hear. Since she's not on the radio anymore, she is finally achieving her dream of being a leftist trad wife.
Yeah.
So how are things down there in Arkansas?
I mean, it's pretty good. Just same old as usual. I mean, how are things in New York? How much crime have you had to avoid?
I step over the homeless every time I leave my house.
There's a knife fight right outside the door.
Jordan has it right. All right, so let's do a couple more super chats, and then we will get back to segments. So Sparky, what a great character and music video from Prince's movie Purple Rain. You're bringing me back, man. Remember, Putin was on the fence about invading Ukraine until he heard Kamala's speech at the Munich Security Conference. I've heard that. Caleb is a historic gem. His books are on Lulu. That's Red Maze. Thank you, Red Maze. Sparky, man, making it rain.
Thanks, Sparky.
My brother knew. Why don't you just go to a strip club like a normal person? My brother knew Ambassador Stevens. Stevens was serious about helping Libya cultivate African unity, including currency. I believe his death was welcomed, if not facilitated by Hillary at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Sparky again, making it rain. Sparky. Meanwhile, in the States, there's a long-time war on small and regional businesses. That and corrupt unions severely shrunk the middle class. A large, thriving middle class is key to economic stability. Very true. All right, Tusker, why don't you read this one? Because I'm going to have to do some housekeeping.
Yeah, sure.
To give Landrew his due.
Okay. Landrew, thank you, Landrew. Workers owning the means of production, we win. Congratulations to the Weiss larger family. Solidarity and community. Thank you, Landrew.
I am Landrew.
Landrew is dead.
Oops. I forgot to fix the sound. Keaton usually does that. So far, though, so good on the tech. If I do say so.
Don't speak too soon, please. Oh, thank you, David Santucci. Thank you for the $50. David. Yes. Good to see Tusker bringing my bookshelf game, indeed.
Right. We are all such dorks. You can tell we all have lovely childhoods. Okay. So this is a fun one. Speaking of Kamala, and right after Kamala, we're going to be dropping my Star Wars essay, which I've worked very hard on, and I hope you enjoy it. All right. So this is a piece I've been thinking of as Kamala, Border Czar no more. No more. Suddenly, the same media that identified her as the border czar has decided that Kamala is no longer the border czar because it became politically inconvenient given the state of the border. There's been a dramatic push by the legacy media to neutralize one of Vice President Kamala Harris's biggest vulnerabilities since becoming the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, her long-standing border czar label. Harris was widely dubbed the border czar after President Biden tasked her in March 2021 to address the root causes of mass migration from Central and South America. While the Biden administration has rejected the title, the term was widely used by her critics and even embraced by multiple news organizations, at least until she ascended to the top of the ticket. Axios went viral Wednesday with its report about the border confusion that has haunted Harris, telling readers the Trump campaign and Republicans have tagged Harris repeatedly with the border czar title, which she never actually had. However, critics cited Axios's own reporting from 2021, saying that Biden had appointed Harris border czar. Axios later added an editor's note stating, quote, "This article has been updated and clarified to note that Axios was among the news outlets that incorrectly labeled Harris a border czar in 2021. Orwellian enough for you yet? Down the memory hole. So this was Axios. They got community noted, actually. And somebody pulled up their old article, which describes Harris, who's been appointed by Biden as the border czar. And this is Molly Hemingway. She's the editor-in-chief of The Federalist. The propaganda press working so hard to erase the fact that Kamala Harris was put in charge of the border shows not only what a vulnerability her role in the border is, but also what a huge vulnerability her general incompetence is. CNN had a similarly drastic change of heart. CNN correspondents Ed Lavandera and CNN commentator Alyssa Farah Griffin both referred to Harris as the border czar in 2021 and 2023, respectively. This week, the network repeatedly rebuked the label. Quote, "The Biden team didn't declare her the border czar," CNN's Casey Hunt said Wednesday morning. "They wanted her to work on kind of the root causes of immigration. What former President Trump said about Harris and immigration was not true. She was never appointed border czar," fellow CNN anchor John Berman also said Wednesday. Fox News Digital asked multiple news organizations, including CNN and Axios, to explain their vocal shift away from the border czar label for Harris. None responded. MSNBC host Simone Sanders, who previously served as Harris's chief spokeswoman in the Biden administration before joining the network, lumped in the border czar claims against her former boss with misinformation about the VP. It's like the cheap fakes. "People are going to have to challenge the misinformation," Sanders said on Morning Joe Wednesday. "You already hear folks talking about the border czar. She wasn't the border czar. She did diplomacy in Central America, but the campaign is going to have to make that case." A clip went viral of left-wing media figure Ron Filipkowski previously calling Harris the border czar on MSNBC after he posted on social media that Axios was incorrect. So here he is, going so far as to say they called Harris the border czar because a lot of times the media sucks. The media sucks. So let's take a look at his previous statement on this.
It's a big problem.
This is Philip Kowski himself.
I think Joe Biden has gone there once. Kamala Harris, who was appointed as the border czar, hasn't gone there at all. And so I think that communication is a big problem.
I guess
I'd say so, sir.
I guess he means himself when he says that
right.
that the media sucks. He's telling on himself. So ABC's Jonathan Karl sang from the same sheet of music, saying she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her. She was given the job of dealing with all the migration that was coming up from Central America, but they will portray her as the one who was in charge of the border, which of course is issue number one for Republicans.
I'm sorry. Are we talking about all the migration that's happening across the border?
Yeah.
I mean,
that sounds like a border czar. If you remember, Biden said she speaks for me on the border. Right. She speaks for me. What is that? CBS News pushed back on the label with multiple segments dedicated to the subject on its streaming channel. Quote, Vice President Harris was not a border czar, CBS anchor John Dickerson declared in one of the segments. Media, quote, fact checkers rushed to defend Harris. PolitiFact gave the claim from the RNC that as border czar, Harris was put in charge of stopping illegal immigration a mostly false rating. USA Today similarly ruled it false to say she was put in charge of the border and that her role was more limited than what a border czar would do. Several other outlets also bent over backwards to separate Harris from the label. Time magazine ran the headline, Kamala Harris was never Biden's border czar. Here's what she really did, calling the label misleading while admitting it had become a political liability. NPR said conservatives made up the inaccurate term border czar, insisting the role of controlling the border belongs to DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The Washington Post accused the Trump campaign of falsely branding her the nation's border czar in a campaign ad. The New York Times got ahead of other news organizations, surprise there, printing the headline, Why Republicans Keep Calling Kamala Harris the Border Czar, on July 17th, 4 days before Biden announced his exit from the race. Okay, so let's take a look at a compilation, banned bill here, put together of what the media's opinion was until 5 minutes before she was named as the presumptive nominee.
About her border record, calling her a
border czar. Vice President Harris was not a border czar.
Meantime, Vice President and border czar Kamala Harris facing some backlash.
What he said about Harris and immigration was not true. She was never appointed border czar.
And this will be her first visit to the U.S.-Mexico border region since she was appointed as the border czar by President Biden.
People are going to have to counter the misinformation. You already hear folks talking about the border czar. She wasn't the border czar.
President Biden tapped Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, to be the border czar.
Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her.
They were very critical of Kamala Harris, especially in her role as border czar.
Now what she's up against is folks lying about her border record, calling her a border czar.
Kamala Harris, who was appointed as the border czar.
The Biden team didn't declare her the border czar. They wanted her to work on kind of the root causes of immigration.
There has been so much criticism against Kamala Harris. You know, she was the border czar.
Calling her sort of the border czar, which wasn't necessarily the case.
So the border, if they weren't planning to address it in a major way, do not make her your border czar. She met with some of the Northern Triangle countries, but nothing has effectively changed.
You know, it really seems like they thought of her as the border czar.
It does seem like indeed that. Well, and also I will have to say, I do kind of have a quibble with the fact that we keep calling her a border czar. But number one, like we've never had a czar. That's not a normal political appointment in the country anyway. So it was already an honorific from the very beginning.
Right.
It was meant to just represent, like, out of the White House team that's directly working with Biden, she's going to be the one that has the answers on the border and on immigration and all that type of stuff. That's what they meant by border czar. And so then the distraction was saying, well, technically, if someone was actually the border czar, it would be the DHS Secretary Mayorkas. Yeah, but then we would have just called him the secretary, like that. There is no border czar position. The reason why they called it that was it was just simply to be, she's the point person in the White House dealing with the border and immigration.
Which they know very well.
They know that very well.
This is just in keeping with the Orwellian way that they've just all mobilized at once to try to manage her record. They're already trying to massage her record as a prosecutor that we were talking about with Caleb. And a lot of this is really talked about in Caleb's book, the way that these globalist powers really want to censor the public. They really want to control the flow of information. They do not trust populism. They do not believe the people have a right to know. It's funny because they constantly talk about their belief in democracy, but they really don't believe in the core institutions of democracy like freedom of speech, freedom of debate. And that is just becoming increasingly just transparently Orwellian. No, she's not the border. Yesterday, she's the border czar. Today, she's not the border czar.
Right. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And one of the other things that I would point out, it was kind of mentioned in that article that she was supposed to address the Honduran, El Salvadorian, like that type of situation. The Hillary Clinton State Department and their link to the Honduran crisis and the reason why we have so many people from Honduras at our borders was perpetrated by the Clinton State Department. That's another aspect of it that Caleb had gotten into in his book. So that's like that State Department causes this type of crisis, causes these refugee situations, and then everyone else is left to deal with it.
Right. All right. So let's take some super chats. This is from Mingla Yip. I just discovered Caleb Maupin. Yeah.
We're having some audio issues on Rumble. I need you to close the slides that you're done with when you're finished, okay?
Okay. Are you having it now?
Yeah, we're still having the audio issues. We need to save on bandwidth, so just close the slides when you're finished with them, okay?
Okay. All right. Oh, I almost removed the wrong one.
Oh, thanks, Jake.
All right. Teach them about theory over there for a second.
Oh, well, I can read Mingula Yip's chat. I just discovered Caleb Maupin, excellent brain. Yeah, he knows a lot about a lot of different things. Even if you don't agree with his analysis and everything that he says, he absolutely does know quite a lot of history as far as like the left movements in the United States and in other countries.
Okay. You want to just feed her the next one while I'm doing this, Jake?
All right, Philip Blair, thank you $2 for the super sticker. And Ramblin' Dan with a $5 super chat. The last 5 minutes of this talk have been tarnished by crackling audio. Please check your audio and connectivity, guys. Go to a break and fix it, please. Maybe that's some of what we're trying to fix at the moment.
That is indeed what we're fixing.
All right. And Philip Blair for another $2. Check out Caleb Maupin's interview with Dr. Shiva. Thank you, Philip. And BMK from, I believe, New Zealand, $2. Great job, Russ. Please interview George Galloway. You guys were kind of thinking you were going to reach out to him at one point, weren't you, to have him on the show?
We have, yeah, because we have a contact with Ian. Supposedly he's going to come on. So we're working on it. We are working on it.
SB, thank you for the $2. Interview Haas Infrared about his new party, the ACP.
All right.
I don't make the interview decisions. I'm just the guest host. So.
All right, and we are back. Okay, so, well, one more. All right, Best Boomer Vita.
Thank you, Best Boomer Vita.
Thank you. We'll spot you the penny. You still get the cowbell. All right, so we will read the rest of those super chats. Also, don't forget tonight is Q&A night. We will be doing that over on Rumble. Now, I have been working on this Star Wars essay, you could argue, my entire life. You could argue I have been working on this since I saw Star Wars for the first time. But in the immediate tense, I've been working on it for the past 3 weeks. As Tusker can tell you, I've been busily slaving away at this. So a lot of people kept asking me, why don't you cover the Acolyte? And I said, well, you know what, man? If I'm going to talk about that, I have a lot to say about what has become of Star Wars and why. And I think a lot of the people commenting about the Acolyte are kind of missing the point of why it has become what it has become. And it started long before Disney bought Star Wars. So this is about 23 minutes. We'll go full screen with it. And I hope you all enjoy it. And I hope you enjoy seeing it as much as I enjoyed making it. And also I give some shout outs at the end. Nobody wanted to use their real name given the nature of this show, but screen names of it took a village. A lot of people helped out, gave me specialized graphics for this. So thank you to Nowhere Man, Mrs. P. Keaton did some graphics for me. So a lot of people helped out. All right, here we go. Enjoy. Now, both of these have the same screen, so I might wind up putting on the countdown first by accident. So let's see.
Okay. All right. See you on the other side.
All right, we got it. All right. On May 25th, 1977, 20th Century Fox released Star Wars. Although no one knew it at the time, it would cause a chain reaction that changed movie-going, sci-fi, and pop culture forever. In 1975, Jaws had established the summer blockbuster model that's defined Hollywood release schedules ever since, but it was the success of Star Wars that really cemented it. The idea that summer is for action, spectacle, and high-concept films, with fall and winter reserved for the Oscar bait, was born in the light of the exploding Death Star and the then unheard-of box office grosses that it left in its wake, tripling the haul of other hits that year like Smokey and the Bandit and Saturday Night Fever. The impact of Star Wars on science fiction is a mixed bag. Although there had been big-budget, studio-backed ventures in the genre before, Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey had opened 9 years earlier to much fanfare and success, along with Planet of the Apes, which spawned 4 sequels and multiple reboots. Sci-fi had traditionally been relegated to the category of B-picture.
Feel the frightening fury of a man-beast, aroused to strange emotions by its first sight of a woman.
Low budget, often campy, and very niche. It was much beloved by its fans, a sentiment captured beautifully in the song Science Fiction Double Feature, Richard O'Brien's elegiac homage to the B-movies of his youth. But sci-fi was largely ignored by mainstream media and award shows. Star Wars changed all that. Well, maybe not the award show part, although it was nominated for Best Picture, a very rare thing for a movie with laser guns and spaceships at that time. And even though it lost to Annie Hall, it's a testament to the cultural phenomena it represented that the Academy, which was still powerful, respected, and quite stodgy at the time, felt compelled to give Star Wars the consolation prize of a special award, while virtually ignoring Close Encounters of the Third Kind, also a hit film that year, and one that was probably more in their wheelhouse. So where's the downside to sci-fi going mainstream? Well, when nobody cares what you're doing, and they aren't giving you much money to do it anyway, that opens up a lot of room for experimentation. From Ed Wood making Bela Lugosi wrestle a rubber octopus in a kiddie pool, to the brilliant low-budget cautionary tale The Day the Earth Stood Still, to a personal favorite, and maybe the most purely punk rock film ever made, A Boy and His Dog.
That stupid broad. You're so funny when you're sexually frustrated. Damn it.
Sci-fi was a place where the studio bosses didn't really dare to tread. Bring it in on a low enough budget for it to make a profit off the genre's built-in fan base, and you could pretty much do what you wanted. Not so after Star Wars. Sci-fi and fantasy films became a big money proposition, and as a result, the likelihood of something as weird and off the wall as George Lucas's own dystopian 1971 film, THX 1138, getting major financing and a wide release became slim to nil. Sure, Blade Runner and Denis Villeneuve's recent Dune films could never have been executed on the same scale without massive infusions of studio cash. But if you look at the 3 adaptations of Richard Matheson's short story I Am Legend, you can see very clearly what got lost in the translation from beloved B genre to well-financed studio darling. The Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price, is creepy and claustrophobic, with its vision of a lone man fighting off hordes of vampires from inside a boarded-up house, inspiring George Romero's radical new take on zombies as viral outbreak in Night of the Living Dead. The second, Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston, is campier and sillier, but still a cult classic and loads of fun. Compare these to the soulless corporate product that is I Am Legend starring Will Smith. It's neither disturbing and nightmarish like the first, or campy and fun like the second. It's the kind of film that's keeping Hollywood up nights, and for good reason, because while we may be a long way, if ever, from AI making The Godfather, we're probably only a few years away from any 12-year-old being able to make something as unoriginal and uninspired as I Am Legend just by entering a prompt into ChatGPT. It calls to mind the scene in Barton Fink where the producer asks the transplanted Broadway playwright what he did to make the unpredictable, despotic, deranged studio boss Lipnick take an interest in him.
Never make Lipnick like you. Never!
I don't understand.
Death, he likes you. He's taken an interest. What the hell did you say to him?
Similarly, in many ways, sci-fi was better off before the studios took an interest. Finally, on the cultural front, there had never been anything like Star Wars, and you could make the argument that there was never a film series with the same kind of wall-to-wall societal penetration again. Yes, I know, I can hear it now.
As if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror.
Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Marvel! All very worthy film series that have entertained millions, but none of them begins to approach the impact of the original Star Wars trilogy. The phenomenon was less like a film and more like the kind of all-pervasive omnipresence that a very few rare pop stars like Elvis, the Beatles, or Michael Jackson have achieved. Yes, Taylor Swift is about as visible as you can be in a media landscape with infinite options, but that's a big qualifier. I promise you, most of the people living today on planet Earth couldn't name a Taylor Swift song. But in 1984, you would have had to go looking for an uncontacted tribe in the Amazon to find someone who wouldn't recognize the chorus of Billie Jean. No one will ever experience that level of fame again. It just isn't possible anymore. So whether Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or Marvel are better or worse or just as good qualitatively is beside the point. They all sprang up in a post-internet world where the audience isn't nearly as captive. From my own personal experience, I can only compare what Star Wars was in the 70s and 80s to MJ in his Thriller era, and I can't compare either to anything that came after. Still skeptical? Still thinking Harry Potter holds an equivalent place in our own time? Let me show you that you're wrong. Star Wars was so big and so impactful that some people will still consume anything labeled Star Wars, even though there hasn't been a good film to come out of the franchise since 1983 and nothing great since 1980. Star Wars movies have ranged from mediocre to unwatchable for 41 years. And with the exception of Andor and The Mandalorian Season 1, kind of 2, you could say the same about the TV series. And yet, a lot of people are very upset about the latest attempt of poor little rich kid screenwriters to hide their lack of talent and meaningful life experience behind a cavalcade of brownness and queerness, otherwise known as the Acolyte.
The power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
That, my friends, is how big Star Wars was in its day. It was so big that some of you still care about Star Wars, like a crackhead that hasn't been able to get a real hit in almost half a century, but keeps going back to the same corner and hoping it won't just be baking soda this time. In that sense, the Collider's obnoxious formulation that the problem with Star Wars is its fans isn't as off base as it might appear at first blush. No one furiously attacked the crimes of Grindelwald because the fans of Harry Potter just didn't care that much. Not so with Star Wars. They care deeply about it still. So in that sense, yes, the fans are the problem, in that inexplicably the franchise still has any. But Collider and company should watch out what they wish for, because when the hate watchers go, you won't be able to fill a screening room with what remains of the audience. Now, I know a lot of folks won't want to hear this, especially people who make their living dropping a video every time Kathleen Kennedy farts in someone's general direction, but no, Disney did not kill Star Wars. It's just driving the final nails into a coffin that George Lucas built with the prequels a quarter century ago. As an Xer who had to wait 3 years to find out that Darth Vader was Luke's father,
I am your father.
And another 3 years for confirmation, which in child years adds up to around 150 total years.
What the fuck?
It's funny hearing pop culture channels tear down the Acolyte for violating lore established in the prequels, which themselves destroyed the lore and much of the magic of the Star Wars universe. The Phantom Menace was probably the most anticipated film release in history. It had been 16 years since the movie-going public had gotten a hit off that galaxy far, far away stem, and they were stoked. Some people camped outside for weeks waiting for tickets to go on sale. In New York City, the well-appointed Ziegfeld was scheduled to host the very first area showing at midnight on May 19th, 1999. In those days, I was busy running 3 theaters in the East Village, and anyway, I was never the kind of freak that was going to pitch a tent on the street for a movie. But a friend hooked me up, so I was one of the lucky few to score a seat. You've never seen an audience so psyched for a movie as the very first audience for the very first showing of the very first new Star Wars film in 16 years. Almost all 20 and 30-somethings who'd grown up on the franchise, we were like Jesus freaks waiting for a new sanctioned by God chapter of the Bible to drop. Only in this case, God was George Lucas. How little did we know of the horrors that awaited us over the course of the film's 2-hour and 11-minute runtime. There had been rumors, vague mumblings from reported screenings out west that the movie was terrible. But in these early days of the internet, those were unconfirmed, and we were happy to ignore them. Some wags had the poor taste to mention Willow, Lucas's awful attempt to catch Star Wars lightning in a bottle twice by following Joseph Campbell's story beats and archetypes, once again in a far less interesting and original vehicle, but nobody wanted to hear that. Nobody wanted to imagine that a Star Wars movie could possibly be as bad, or even worse, than Willow. Then the lights faded, and we quickly assumed the role of the Sabine women, subjected to the crudest assault by our conquerors imaginable there in the dark. Right from the beginning, you knew something wasn't right. Here are these weird alien things talking about space trade, and are they Asian or something? What is going on here?
The blockade is finished. We dare not go against the Jedi.
It was nothing like the thrilling opening scenes of the old films. Then, out came the lightsabers. And even though we hadn't been given any reason to care thus far, there were Jedi on screen with lightsabers. We cheered. We hoped against hope that maybe this movie wouldn't suck, even as the evidence was mounting that it was going to suck. Oh yes, it was going to suck big, hairy bantha balls. Then, 2 things happened that broke Star Wars forever. The first was the introduction of the idea of midichlorians.
The reading is off the chart. Over 20,000.
Even Master Yoda doesn't have a midichlorian count that high.
And the second was the virgin birth of Anakin Skywalker.
Who was his father?
There was no father. I carried him, I gave birth, I raised him. I can't explain anything.
Attacking the Acolyte for violating Star Wars lore with an immaculate lesbian birth that predates the immaculate asexual birth of Anakin Skywalker is really a case of people who have had their standards systematically lowered, accusing others of the same.
I carried them.
I created them. If you only knew the power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
If you're accepting the very premise of midichlorians and immaculate births in Star Wars, but you won't accept lesbian space witches, you've simply had your standards lowered at an earlier point on an ever-descending trajectory of suck. As soon as Obi-Wan started talking about midichlorian counts, Star Wars as a beautiful myth and morality tale died. And whatever this misshapen pile of Tusken Raider crap carrying the logo now may be, was born. Caring what happened after that is like yelling at a corpse that's been rotting in the ground since the turn of the millennium. Because when the Force became no longer a primer on Eastern mysticism for kids...
Kid, I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful Force.
And the experience of it, no longer framed as a matter of expanded consciousness, but one of having the right blood, well, now you went and made the Force elitist. Sure. There was always that fairy tale aristocratic blood will out logic in Luke's story of someone from a renowned family raised as a peasant, nonetheless finding his specialness, and in the very idea of the Force running in the Skywalker family. But until the words midichlorian were spoken, you could kind of accept the proposition of a bloodline being exceptionally Force sensitive without thinking that anyone without special microbes would be blind to what Yoda quite clearly presents not as a rare and extraordinary skill set, but as the very nature of existence.
Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
Midichlorians took an idea that had been very hopeful and inspiring and turned it into something that only a few special people can experience. Essentially, in the Star Wars universe forever after, communion with God is only for the midichlorianally gifted, with everyone else congenitally unable to live in a higher state of being. And I can tell you, as a boy who was inspired to do all kinds of dangerous climbing and flipping and balancing in high places because I wanted to be like Luke, that just really sucks. And I feel bad for all the boys and girls today who have grown up in a world where you can't be a Jedi if you aren't born that way. And Kathleen Kennedy did not do that. George Lucas did.
I went over to George Lucas and said, George, what the F am I saying? Well, what's a midichlorian? And I remember George said, okay, you know in your gut, you have millions of bacteria. I said, yeah. Okay, one of those has an intelligence. And then he laughed. I was like,
But back to that horrible night. For any of us who still held out hope that it might get better, the final insult was still to come. Jar Jar Binks walked on screen.
Misa called Jar Jar Binks. Misa, your humble servant.
That won't be necessary.
Oh, but it is.
And at that moment, the realization dawned on us that there would be no rescue, that it would not get better, that this was it. This was the movie. After 16 years, this was what Lucas had come up with. Willow? God. At that point, we would have settled for the holiday special. When it finally ended, there was no clapping. None. Zero. Only sadness and silence. We avoided eye contact as we exited, feeling dirty and violated, eager to get home and hug our children, significant others, pets, what have you. Anything to take away the awful realization, if even for a moment, that Star Wars was truly dead. So, why am I telling you all this? Well, remember the medium in Poltergeist? This is where I try to persuade you to go into the light and stop haunting the house. Because you don't belong here anymore.
Yes, yes.
Well, Anakin just killed a whole Death Star. How many people died on that?
All right, Zibbit.
Yes, it's terrible that in our modern world, a soulless corporation can buy the rights to a cherished cultural myth and destroy it. It would be as if somebody bought the Odyssey off Homer right at the part where Odysseus is passing between the Scylla and Charybdis, and then they spent the rest of the story degrading his character before having his wife run off with a transgender Cyclops at the end. It sucks, but it's time to move on. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It doesn't belong to us. It doesn't even belong to the younger, hipper fan base they're after because they aren't watching it either. This is for BlackRock and Vanguard and for half-bright dipshits with enough family money to write screenplays for peanuts that all their critical theory indoctrinated friends will like.
I think it's canon that R2-D2 is a lesbian.
Oh,
interesting. Yeah. Huh.
Ask Filoni. Okay.
Ask Filoni.
Yeah, it's a bummer. But hey, if you really, really want to experience what a continuation of the Star Wars saga might have been like, if Lucas hadn't forgotten what was special about his own creation and then sold it to the white slavers at Disney, who beat to death the stinking corpse of what was left, I'd recommend the Expanded Universe books. They perfectly capture the tone of the original trilogy while expanding into more mature themes that will appeal to the adult reader. It's no accident that one of the first things Kennedy did after Disney acquired Lucasfilm was to kill it off. The last thing she wanted was a reminder of what might have been out there for fans to compare to the social engineering project that she had in mind. Beyond that, there's only one thing to do about Star Wars that makes sense for anyone who loves it or ever found joy and inspiration in it. In the words of that great philosopher king of the desert wastelands, the Lord Humongous, just walk away.
Just walk away, and there will be an end to the horror.
Thanks for watching. All right.
All right.
I feel like I got a lot off my chest there that I've been storing up since 1999.
You certainly did. And it's actually, I mean, I remember my family being so excited about going and seeing that Star Wars prequel. And we went to like the special theater in Little Rock that was like, it was a curved theater and it could sit like a whole bunch of people. And we got the tickets there and standing there. But I totally didn't, because I was way too young at the time. I just never picked up on the virgin birth of Anakin or anything. So a lot of that was very interesting to me.
Okay. I had more. I had more that I cut. Like I really got into in the first draft how the audience reacted. I am not shitting you. As soon as they said midichlorians, the audience audibly groaned. And when the virgin birth came up, we laughed. Like the audience laughed. Like nobody could fucking believe that this was the movie. Like they would have been better off getting a VHS camera and filming paper plates on fire flying in a backyard than releasing this shit. Like, I made a joke out of it, but really there was no clapping at the end of the movie. Like everyone was just like, that's I can't believe that happened. Like, I can't believe that was the movie.
I think my experience was just a little bit different because I don't remember like kind of that silence, but I also remember whenever I'd gone to it, there were a lot of kids in the audience. And I think that a lot of the kids in the audience liked the lightsabers and, you know, all the other stuff that went with it. So it seemed like kids were pretty happy just because it was filled with action. I don't know how the older.
Well, and I went to a midnight screening in Manhattan. There were no children to be seen. That was an all like 20 and 30 something audience that grew up on Star Wars.
Right.
And we went and saw this. And that's why, like, I'm seeing some of these pop culture channels talking about, well, you can't have a lesbian birth that predates the Anakin birth because that violates the lore. Well, you know, if you're accepting that, it's because you were too young to realize how much that sucked. So you grew up with this idea of virgin births. And I am telling you, literally, we all burst out laughing as soon as they said that. So to me, at this point, like, yeah, is what Disney is doing, like, just beating the corpse to death? Sure. I mean, they're really going above and beyond and just degrading the whole franchise. But it was dead the second you said midichlorians. As soon as you turned the Force into something biologically based, you changed the whole beauty of that myth. You took away the heart of it. So after that, I mean, I didn't really have any interest in it from that point on.
Yeah, because it seems like if without the midichlorianness of it all, then you have the situation where any kind of regular Joe Blow or whatever has the potential to rise up and fight against the empire and have an impact on society, and relegating it to, like what you said, just like a blood transference is, takes away from the magic.
Right. Well, when you look at how Yoda describes it, it's clearly Eastern mysticism, right? Oh, it's the Force. It's in all things are one. You turn it into midichlorians. I mean, so what are you saying? Everyone who's not born that way can't connect with the nature of the universe? That's terrible.
Right.
That's you took what was a very beautiful world and you made it a very dark, depressing one at that moment.
Kind of like very Jehovah's Witness type, you know?
That'll be the next video. Star Wars has Jehovah's Witnesses. All right, so let's take a look at some super chats and we will go to our last segment. One that's so hot, we have to do it in 2 parts. All right. Oh, right. Rumble Rants. All right. Hey, Russ, I don't know if you're following the Israel-Lebanon situation, but it looks like it's getting ugly quick. Yes, Noah Goop. We are watching that. I'd be surprised if we don't cover that Tuesday. Yeah. I can't imagine news is going to happen that supersedes that. Any other Rumble Rants, Dick?
Research is preliminary, but that we definitely did look at that.
The Judge 51, boycott bookshelves. But that, you know, you people never think about the bookshelf makers.
Yeah.
Audio fuck towards the end of Caleb's segment. That's what I heard. It's what I heard. I don't think that's ever happened before. So
well, we'll put the, if we can correct the audio, we'll put it up on Gumroad for $5.
Yeah, there you go. Russ, audio fucked also. Please fix stream before next segment. Well,
Bonzi, did we get it fixed? I think
it's okay
Jake
now, right? Old Stoner, 1969. I have no idea what moves polls in USA. Like nobody talks policy. It's cult of personality. Question: has it always been this way? I mean, at least since the Kennedy-Nixon debate, I would say.
Yeah, I would say especially. I think there's probably always been an element of cult of personality involved in that, but I do think with the explosion of television, social media, and all that other type of stuff, and then just with our more marketed culture, that really like the neoliberal part is because neither party really did anything for, anyone that wasn't elite. It just turned into a branding exercise. So it's gotten even more close to the cult of personality type thing that we've seen now. But I think there's been elements that have always been there. What do you think?
There's always been that element, but people are definitely more mindless. And I think the people who are not mindless walked away. Like now the people, who do you see running around talking about Kamala Harris? These are not the sharpest knives in the drawer. I mean, it's
No,
these are the dumbest of the dumbest of the dumb liberal elites. Like they're the ones who were too dumb to get out of there after the Mueller report dropped. Like these are the last people who you tell them Kamala, they'll say Kamala. Tell them tomorrow Mitt Romney's the nominee. They'll go. You tell them Liz Cheney, they'll go Liz Cheney. It doesn't. That's all you got left. That's all. Those are the only people left.
It's just the people that are willing to accept like Rachel Maddow making airplane noises while spoon feeding you, like state propaganda.
That's it. That's it. One day they're defending Joe Biden. Oh, how do you know? You're not a doctor. You're not his doctor. And then the next day, oh yeah, no, he's whoo-hoo. Yeah, it's going to be Kamala. Yep. Yeah, Kamala. No questioning. Hey, why is the guy still president if he's not mentally competent to run for president? No, they would never ask that question. Right. A shady deal.
Shady.
Yeah, fellow Arkansan.
Big Suey.
My real name. Cash Jordan told that all laundromats in New York City are being robbed every day. Be careful, Russ. There's a war on clean clothes. Listen, man. This is what I always say when people say, "Oh, you're grifting." You know what's most insulting to me if you say that we're grifting with this channel? What you are saying, in essence, is we're too stupid to come up with a real grift. Cash Jordan, that guy's got a grift. That guy's got a grift. I see his headlines living here in New York. They're so fucking ridiculous. Right. It has begun. Mob raid supermarket. Like, dude, right. the guy will get like 1.4 million views for this fucking nonsense.
And also, if the laundromats in NYC are just unusable, I hear that the White House has a special on laundry service.
They do, yeah.
You might have to be committing a genocide to use it, though. So
yeah, exactly. A different kind of laundry there. Old Stoner, 1969. You will get you million subscribers doing this product. Russell, start your own channel doing this content, but don't take it off here as well. Listen, man.
Speaking of Russell saying he could find a different grift.
Yeah, listen.
He could just do movie commentary.
I could just do movie. Hey, man, those guys do a lot better than politics channels too. I mean, look, if you look at like Jimmy, yeah, Jimmy performs like the bigger of those channels do, but only people really at the top perform like those movie channels. Although it is a saturated space at this point. But if you go and you start telling these people out in the heartland the morality tale they want to hear, if you live in New York or Seattle or Los Angeles, you start feeding them what they want to hear about. Yeah, you see those blue cities falling apart. Fortune, that's a beautiful grift. Listen, man, not for nothing. Do I look like I'm from the fucking muscle end of the family? Do I look like I would last long in a city that is what Cash Jordan is describing? Okay, do you really think I walk outside to like escape from New York? Come on, man. Tusker was just here. We walked through Central Park in the middle of the night. What did you see?
I saw, well, I mean, maybe not in the middle of the night, because there were still like some kids and stuff out,
but
like
10.
Ladies were running
10.
on their own, that with their headphones in. They weren't carrying a can of mace or anything. They were just running, and there were families out there kind of wrapping it up. There were a ton. There was another park that we'd kind of passed at some point where people were watching a movie in the park.
Oh yeah, Bryant Park. Went by Bryant Park. No. Cash Jordan, basically, if he sees some story about some shit happen somewhere in a city of 8 million people, he will throw up a video framing it as civilization is collapsing in New York now, and you can't, all the stores are closing. It's just, none of it is true. But that's a great grip.
He turns it into an every street corner.
every
story
street.
instead
Yes,
of just
exactly. All right. So Ukrainians blew up Alexander Dugin's daughter, Daria Dugin. She was a real babe and was brilliant. MSM chose the worst picture they could find, and she still looked good. Another reason to hate Nazis. Play the name, because I never said the
Daria
person's name.
Dugin. It was the daughter of Alexander Dugin.
No, Sparky 63.
Oh, Sparky.
Oh, was this your other? Does your burner phone here? Bonzo Beans. Austin Powers showed how it's done. Anyone can find their mojo, even if they lost their juices. That's true, man. Those are words to live by. I think Anthony Robbins said that. My real name, the Ewoks were harbingers of doom. That's when the suck began. Well, that's why if you look at my video, because I worked with Mrs. P on this, my trajectory of suck, you had Star Wars, Empire is the peak, Return of the Jedi is below both, and then it just plummets after that. That's my take.
Fucking rocks.
Shinabilly. Russell, I regret to inform you, Deadpool and Wolverine had more pathos than any Disney product in the past 3 to 4 years. I enjoyed it. I mean, it's nothing to regret. I'd like to see them make good movies. I mean, my take, and this is many people's take, is it's a holdover. Like, it's not something they can really build on. What, Hugh Jackman, was he gonna freaking roll out there in his wheelchair as Wolverine? He's not gonna be doing this forever. So it's a holdover from the 20th Century Fox acquisition. But if you look at the other projects they have coming up, I think this is it's like Guardians 3. It's a blip in a sea of shit. It's a little kernel of corn in a sea of shit. Progressive lefty. I agree, Russ. Those books were great. I've read almost all of them. None since Disney changed the timeline. I read all the new Jedi Order books during the pandemic. I actually gave them away to kids. But yeah, I read all of those. Star Wars died after Empire. Return is good. I could have done without the Ewoks, but overall it's good. Ravid Laz. The Force has long thought to have been inspired by DC Comics' The Source, which is the sentient God consciousness of the DC universe. The Source was introduced in 1971 by Jack Kirby. Interesting. I mean, he took a lot of ideas from Dune, too. If you ever look at the novelization of Star Wars, it's very clear how much he took from Dune. He's on a desert planet. He's kind of this messianic figure. There are definitely elements of that. I can't wait to move back to NWA.
Northwest Arkansas, Rogers specifically.
See,
Cool, Henry.
I totally would not have understood that. All right, so look, let's do the Olympics thing. Then we will finish up the super chats. Then we got to go over to Rumble to do part 2 of the Olympics, because for reasons you will understand if you don't already about the Olympics coverage. All right, so drag performance resembling Last Supper at Olympic opening ceremony rankles conservatives. Well, what doesn't rankle those folks? Come on. The extravagant opening ceremony of the 2024 Paris Olympics has caused fury among the populist and religious right in the United States and elsewhere, with critics especially unhappy about an apparent depiction of the Last Supper featuring drag performers. A fashion show at the ceremony included a scene that resembled a modern recreation of Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting. French actor and singer Philippe Catherine appeared as the Greek god Dionysus, painted blue and wearing little more than a bunch of flowers covering his modesty. While some fans loved this unabashed display of French camp and kitsch, others, particularly those who espouse conservative or Christian beliefs, were not happy with it. Quote, in this scene from the Olympic opening ceremony, the famous painting of the Last Supper is recreated, but Jesus is replaced with an obese woman, while queer and trans figures, including a child, depict her apostles. Jenna Ellis, former 2020 campaign attorney to Donald Trump, told her 1 million followers on X. She described the ceremony as containing overt pagan and satanic symbolism. The Last Supper refers to the final meal that Jesus Christ shared with his 12 apostles before he was crucified. Didn't even pick up the check. It's also a popular subject in Christian art, most famously depicted by Da Vinci, who painted a scene that captured the apostles' reaction to Jesus's announcement of his betrayal. Thomas Jolly, the artistic director of the opening ceremony, defended the production when asked at a news conference Saturday about some of the backlash. Jolly said he was unaware of the criticism and wanted to display inclusion. When we want to include everyone and not exclude anyone, questions are raised, he said at an International Olympic Committee media briefing. Quote, our subject was not to be subversive. We never wanted to be subversive. Yeah, okay. We wanted to talk about diversity. Diversity means being together, he continued. We wanted to include everyone, as simple as that. In France, we have freedom of creation, artistic freedom. We are lucky in France to live in a free country. I didn't have any specific messages that I wanted to deliver. In France, we are republic. We have the right to love whom we want. We have the right not to be worshipers. We have a lot of rights in France, and this is what I wanted to convey. All right, my views on this are nuanced, but I will get into it on the other side when we actually look at the video. Once we found out they were scrubbing it, me and Keaton went to find every account that had little clips of this, and I got together as much of it as could be found. Kansas City Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker called the depiction crazy in a post on Instagram and quoted the New Testament book Epistle to the Galatians, warning that for what things a man shall sow, those also shall he reap. Butker sparked accusations of sexism and homophobia over a commencement speech in May, in which he told a class of college graduates that one of the most important titles a woman can hold is homemaker. Bishop Emmanuel Gobelard, a spokesperson representing the Holy See for the 2024 Paris Olympics, told NBC News that the depiction of the Last Supper left him deeply hurt. Quote, the fact that our religion should be mocked is usual, and we are used to blasphemy in France, but the context isn't the same, he said. In an event that brings together all or part of the population, I found this staging hurtful and out of place. Far-right French politician Marianne Maréchal Le Pen said in a post on X that the performance was, quote, not France that is speaking, but a left-wing minority ready for any provocation. Elon Musk responded to and amplified several memes decrying the wokeness of the event. And Kyle Becker, a former Fox News producer with more than 500,000 X-followers, said the games had gone full woke dystopian. This ignited debates held in varying levels of good faith on social media. The British writer and broadcaster David Aronovich was among those to point out that the Last Supper has been pastiched, parodied, and altered tens of thousands of times since Da Vinci painted it in the 1490s. Nonetheless, Bishop Robert Barron of the Diocese of Winona-Rochester in Minnesota asked his 280,000 X-followers, quote, would they ever have dreamed of mocking in this gross public way a scene from the Quran? He responded that we all know the answer. Okay, so this next paragraph is bullshit, but I'm going to read it anyway and then argue with it. French freedom of expression has not been aimed solely at one religion, however. In 2015, gunmen killed 12 people to avenge controversial cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad in an attack on the French satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo. The publication even republished the controversial caricatures 5 years later to mark the start of the attacker's trial. Now, that in and of itself is factually true, but to draw a parallel between staging something like that for the Olympics and what a satiric magazine not representing the Olympics chose to do is bullshit. To say that that is a refutation of that, there is no way in hell, I think we all know, they would have done that on stage at the Olympic Games. So that's an absurd parallel to draw. Tusker, anything before we move on?
Yeah, no, I agree. You're talking about most likely a privately owned French satirical newspaper that's
Right.
publishing that type of stuff. And while I might think that that is disrespectful to people of those religions, and I personally wouldn't do it myself, you're talking about a totally different situation than an event that's held by the government of France that is not supposed to be needlessly divisive towards all of its populations and is supposed to be respectful of those things. Yeah.
Where you were also, I mean, it's an event, and I don't want to jump on our coverage on the other side, but you're talking about an event that is meant to speak to essentially the entire planet that is participating in this. And you have many conservative cultures that are not down with a lot of what was in that ceremony. So why do that? Why are you trolling the world with your ideology? So moving along. This deeply secular postmodern society knows who its enemy is. They are naming it, and we should believe them, Barron said in a video message. We Christians, we Catholics should not be sheepish. We should resist. So Andrew Tate here, who, when I think of Jesus, the next person I usually think of is Andrew Tate. I am boycotting the Olympics. I will watch nothing. The opening ceremony, planned and orchestrated by a gay Jew, was disgusting. I will be placing signs outside of the French embassy in Romania tomorrow at 7 p.m. Respect Jesus. Wow. All right. Well, this is the thing. I think Catholics who are offended by this have a point. Andrew should have a seat. He's not helping. He's not helping anyone who wants to say, well, this is just reactionary psychos who have a problem with this, because Andrew, you're a reactionary psycho. Kyle Becker, the 2024 Paris Olympics has gone full woke dystopian. The opening ceremony was filled with transgender mockery of the Last Supper, the golden calf idol, and even the pale horse from the book of Revelation. I don't think that is true, by the way. The pale horse, apparently it's something from French history. I was talking to Keaton about it before. The golden calf idol, I mean, that's a very common symbol in different cultures. That's not what it represents here. The Olympics has made it clear that Christian viewers aren't welcome. Well, hey, the Last Supper thing, you have a point. See, these people always have to take it too far. This was a pretty funny response. I'm actually embarrassed on behalf of France. This is going down as the worst opening ceremony in history. And the response, I'm going to go out on a limb and say 1936 was actually the worst opening ceremony for the Olympics. Touché. So, hey, some good news there. The Palestinian delegation went down the Seine flying the Palestinian flag. You had a lot of charming people in the response to this video saying, well, you don't have a country, so you shouldn't be there, that kind of thing. But they didn't listen to that, and good for them. Okay, so the backlash against this was so quick and so thorough. That's why we're doing it on the other side. We can't show any video of the opening ceremony. So you can see here, this user says, Athletia Sports, on behalf of the International Olympic Committee, is actively filing DCMA takedown requests with X. I retweeted a series of videos in which I criticized the opening ceremony. I created one custom edit comparing the Last Supper and the opening scene. X locked my account and removed the video. I deleted all of my Olympics-related content. Losing my account isn't worth it. While my use clearly fits within fair use, the IOC is clearly using the DCMA as a way to silence critics, which clearly they are. So this is BRICS news. Just in, Olympics removes its own opening ceremony video that features drag queens from YouTube. So they pulled
Why
down
would the
their own-
Olympics remove its own
so
video?
that people can't clip it and comment on it. I mean, it's that is the running theme. That was why we were debating between a couple different stories. I decided to do the Kamala Czar story because it fit with this story. I mean, there's just this effort to suppress speech, to suppress debate. Now, look, I just showed most of the tweets criticizing that. While, as I said, I agree that a lot of what was in that opening ceremony, because of the context, was unnecessarily trolling people who don't share those beliefs, who don't share those attitudes. This is the Olympics. It's not for you. It's not for Western liberals. It's not for gender ideologues. It's for the world. It is not a platform for you to present your divisive and controversial ideas about gender and sexuality on. It is for everyone, including kids. It's not everyone agrees with that, though. A lot of the world, I would say most of the world does not share those beliefs. So you've been entrusted with the Olympics. You can be artistic without being offensive in that way, and it was inappropriate. Then again, if you look at those tweets, they go too far. Yeah, this is the book of Revelation. It's like, come on, man. You can make a very rational and reasoned critique against that ceremony without going into batshit crazy claims.
And I'll talk more. I'll give more of my comments on the other side.
All right, Chris Pavlovsky. This is abuse of the DMCA, and we won't have any of it at Rumble. So good on them, man. A lot of people say, well, do you trust Rumble? Hey, man, innocent until proven guilty. Rumble has, whenever things like this have come up, they've stuck to their guns in a way that Elon has not. Because a lot of this stuff is getting pulled down from X. People are getting their accounts suspended. Now, just to be clear, what we are doing on Rumble is not a violation of YouTube's own rules. But we have to worry now that the Olympics are going to game the algorithm. They're going to game the AI to make copyright claims that are invalid, because clearly it is fair use. We're not sitting here and checking out and showing the opening ceremony. What we're going to be doing is stopping, going, commenting on it. That is totally fair use. That is supposed to be allowed on YouTube, but we don't need the headaches of them making a false takedown claim on our video. So unfortunately, we have to go over there. So good for Chris Pavlovsky. Now, C-Spire, which is a, I think it's a phone company. We were shocked by the mockery of the Last Supper during the opening ceremonies of the Paris Olympics. C-Spire will be pulling our advertising from the Olympics. I think they were followed by others, and that may be the reason why, this just broke today as we were preparing for the show. Paris Olympics organizers apologized to Christians for Last Supper parody. Apology follows anger among Catholics. So we'll just take a brief look at that. The organizing committee of Paris 2024 has apologized to Catholics and other Christian groups who were outraged by a scene during the opening ceremony that evoked Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper painting with drag queens, a transgender model, and a singer made up as the Greek god of wine. Quote, clearly, there was never an intention to show disrespect to any religious group. Yeah, right. The opening ceremony, it never occurred to anybody. Hey, drag queen Last Supper, no, the Catholics are going to love it. They're going to love it. The opening ceremony tried to celebrate community tolerance, the Paris 2024 spokesperson Anne Deschamps told a press conference. We believe this ambition was achieved. If people have taken any offense, we're really sorry. Please don't boycott the Olympics. It cost us billions of dollars. That's how I translate that. France has a rich Catholic heritage, but also has a long tradition of secularism and anti-clericalism. Blasphemy is legal. Well, yeah. everywhere in the West, pretty much, and
Yeah.
considered by many to be an essential pillar of freedom of speech. Supporters of the tableau praised its message of inclusivity and tolerance. Monsignor Emmanuel Gobelard, a delegate of the bishops of France for the Games, said some French athletes had had trouble sleeping because of the fallout from the controversy. Archbishop Charles Cicluna, the highest-ranking Catholic official in Malta and an official for the Vatican's powerful doctrinal office, said he had contacted France's ambassador to Valletta to complain about the gratuitous insult. The Italian Bishops' Conference said that what should have been a celebration of French culture took an unexpectedly negative turn, becoming a parade of banal errors accompanied by trite and predictable ideologies. An article in Avenir, the daily Italian newspaper affiliated with the Catholic Church, said, quote, "Don't take us for moralistic bigots, but what's the point of having to experience every single global event, even a sporting one, as if it were a gay pride?" Matteo Salvini, the leader of the Far-Right League, a party in Giorgia Meloni's coalition government, described the segment as squalid. Opening the Olympics by insulting billions of Christians around the world was a really bad start, dear French, he added. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban spoke of the moral void of the West. Some commentators said the controversy was another example of 21st century culture wars turbocharged by a 24-hour news cycle and social media. Yeah, well, you can't really go out of your way to ignite a culture war and then
Right.
complain when you get one. Yeah, no, it didn't occur to anyone working on this that it was going to ignite a firestorm.
Right. And also that's just one of those things that like we no longer live in a world where information doesn't travel as fast as it does, and where you're not going to have, if it offends someone like almost instantly, how that's not just going to proliferate, spread, and gain momentum. I mean, that's just not the world that we're living in right now. And so if you're putting on an event like this, I think it is, if you're trying to represent yourself on the world stage as a government, then you need to do it in good taste.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
and I would say that one of my biggest problems with the whole entire thing was not necessarily even the representation of the trans or anything like that. It was more just the hypersexualization
Right.
of the entire event that makes it doesn't really make it suited for broadcast to the world, because it is kind of alienating in that way.
Right. Well, this is, and we'll talk about it more on the other side because we're going to spend a lot of time on that Marie Antoinette thing. This is what I mean when I say my views on it are nuanced. As a director, I wish I could see the whole thing so I could really evaluate it as a work. As a director, what I've seen artistically, I don't have to agree with your ideology or your views to evaluate you objectively, or I try to be objective as an artist. Artistically, that shit was solid, man. That was solid. Like, if you direct and you understand what went into that, it was a pretty amazing achievement. It was the kind of thing that, like, what very often happens when you get these kind of woke things, the people executing them, for example, the Acolyte, which set off that whole video.
Right.
The Acolyte is so terrible, not because it's woke per se, but because, as is very typical of these woke Hollywood productions, the people creating them have no talent, and they're using these ideological affectations to hide what is essentially a core vapidness in their work. Now, this was a case where the guy who made this is good. From watching it, I don't know his other work, but he's good. And the execution of it was quite stunning, and something that, as an artist, I understand. You got this once in a lifetime chance where they gave you basically unlimited resources, where you could stage whatever you can imagine to an extreme that you will never get the opportunity to do again. And you can stage it on the Seine. using castles and historical
Right, like
architecture.
it wasn't that you built like a cloistered Colosseum like stadium thing to where then you put the show in the confines of that. They
Right.
actually let you live the living, breathing.
They let you do
French.
whatever you want with virtually unlimited resources.
Yeah.
So, and we'll talk about this more when we look at the Marie Antoinette thing. I've got that in its entirety because it really makes this point. That was as an artist watching that was a stunningly well executed and conceived work of art.
Yeah, I
It was
thought the
not-
Marie Antoinette, that one was my favorite one out of all the controversial pieces. It was the one that
the execution was stunning. Of all of it, even the Last Supper. I mean, it was all very, very well executed aesthetically.
Okay.
But that was not the place for some of those statements. And to put that in to a context like that, it's selfish. I understand as an artist, you got a once in a lifetime chance to do your dream here, but that's a very selfish choice to put things in it that in this ceremony that you've been put in charge of that is supposed to be for the whole world, that you certainly knew was going to be upsetting and offensive for a lot of that world audience. That's a very selfish choice. He did not consider his responsibility to the people he's doing it for. He only considered what he wanted to do.
Yeah, and even if he didn't 100% know that it might, there had to at least be some inkling of an idea in the back of his head that said this might cause a firestorm.
Of course, not even in the back of his head. Come on, man.
I know, but I'm just trying to be generous.
No, man. If you're a director, you every part of it, you go over it again and again and again and again. Believe me, he knew, and it was quite intentional.
Okay.
And that's very selfish of him. So
Fair point,
we will look at some of the footage on Rumble, not because it is in violation of YouTube rules, but because the Olympic Committee is being extremely unreasonable about exercising fair use in a way that is not in keeping with YouTube standards. All right, so let's take a look at the last super chats before we close the lights in East Berlin and breathe the sweet air of freedom over in West Berlin. Sparky, making it rain like he do. It's a mistake to think of economic and political systems as their ideal form because none of them work in pure form, and in reality, none of the countries nowadays practice them as such. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what Keaton always says about why he doesn't want to get into theory. It's like, what are we even talking about here? Everyone's got a plan until they get hit, right?
Right.
All right, David Santucci, $20. Thank you, David. There are exactly 3 Star Wars movies. The first one called Star Wars, the second was The Empire Strikes Back, and the third, Return of the Jedi. Fight me. Well, I'm not going to fight you if you watch that video. We're on the same page, brother.
I have enough midichlorians. I think I can take David.
Don't start talking that midichlorian shit. Not around here. Not around these parts. JM, great job, Russell. Thank you, JM. Thank you. Konstantin Kuznetsky Basin. Great stuff, Russ. I gave up on the Star Wars franchise after the first sequel. You mean like the prequels, or you didn't like Empire? You can't mean Empire. That was the best of the series. Charles almost unsubbed and shit posted on Twitter with the Willow hatred. I will forgive for now. Otherwise, yeah, you're right. Listen, man, I put that in the same
category. Thank you for the 50 and whatever currency that was.
Yes, thank you. I guess that's Hong Kong? No. No, Hong Kong's under the UN.
Hong Kong isn't under the UN.
UN.
Is it?
UN.
Oh, yuan.
The currency. Yuan, yeah.
Sorry, you said it with a U.
Yeah. You know my pronunciation.
I know.
All right, so listen, with Willow, that's another one where if you saw it when you were a little kid, you just didn't realize it sucked. But if you went and saw Willow as the follow-up to Star Wars, you knew it sucked. Because you were comparing it to Star Wars, because that was the next thing George Lucas did after Star Wars, and it sucked.
Okay. Makes sense. I have fond memories of it.
If you saw it as a little kid, I'm sure it was, But if you went and saw it as George Lucas's long-awaited follow-up to Star Wars, it was like Howard the Duck. It was another one of his shitty movies. You see Miller, super sticker. Thank you, $10. Yadira Ramirez. In China 2015, I didn't communism, deregulation.
In China 2015, I didn't see communism. So I can't make out the deregulation and then a light bulb.
Thank you, deregulation. Is that thank you? Does it have
maybe thank you, yeah, maybe that's what that is.
Maybe
all right, we did it. Thank you, Yadira.
All right, we broke the code. All right, so, and don't forget, we have Q&A on the other side for anyone who wants to call in over there. Janice P. Gojira was the best part of the show. Rose Blossom. I don't mind being a homemaker as long as I can drink and complain as much as I want. Well,
that's the reason. Actually, the drinking and complaining part of being a homemaker is the respectable part of it. So keep it up.
June Cleaver hitting the gin. Brandon Guillory. It's a depiction of the Bacchanal of the Adrians. Come on, man. No, you come on, man. The way that they staged that, the way that they posed it. I've heard that. Yeah, it's the Last Supper.
I don't know what that is.
It's the Last Supper. They're trying to claim now that, no, we were representing this Dionysian festival, and I'm sure that was part of the inspiration. But the visual reference is clearly to the painting of the Last Supper. David Santucci, in free speech loving France, they banned headscarves and jailed Muslims who criticized Charlie Hebdo after the shootings. Yeah, well, all these Western countries are very fond of their constitutions until they get nervous.
Right.
Joel, congrats to Bilal Muhammad last night, becoming the first Palestinian UFC champion. Oh, really?
Did he really?
And near that.
Congratulations.
Very cool.
Excellent.
Ivan K. Chewbacca's co-pilot bleeding internally. Call him Mr. Hands Solo. Okay. All right, Jake, we got any more Rumble rants before we go over to West Berlin? Brooks, 1, 2, 3. The vote who, no matter who crowd is so stupid, they would vote in Mr. Hankey. You got that right. Any others? P.W. Walker, I heard that Iran summoned the French ambassador to Iran and lectured him out over the portrayal of Jesus as prophet. Yeah, well, they consider that part of their tradition as well. They're people of the book. Aja Murray, $2. Blasphemy against Islam will soon be illegal in Western Europe if things continue the way they're going. So don't be glib about blasphemy being legal in the West. Man, they're going to make a lot of other things illegal before that. So I am worried about censorship quite a bit in general. So don't forget to like and subscribe if you like what we do. And if you don't like what we do, well, to hell with you.
Sorry, we tried.
We tried. Look, man, in the next show, I'm gonna play the kazoo, so that's worth tuning in for. Do Dissidents. I don't play the kazoo. DoDissidents.com/rumble is where we are heading now.
And guys, we're gonna do the whole regular thing, little break, and we're gonna pick up with the Olympic coverage and all that stuff. So come on over.
All right, so Jake, you've got this whole thing, right? I don't have to do anything, right? We're good. Yeah, I hope so. Okay. Otherwise, it's going to be like when on the news they don't cut to the commercial and they're just kind of sitting there. All
Keaton's
right.
gonna have to bring Augie to work.
Yeah,
This goes down
exactly.
poorly.
Put that kid in the tech booth.
Yeah.
All right, Jake. I am assuming you're going to take us out after I encourage us. All right, folks. Thank you all for joining us. We will see you on the other side with more of our Olympics coverage and our Q&A. Tusker will be coming on over, burning the midnight oil. All right, everybody. Be safe. Be well. Courage.
Please clap.